Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 126 to 150. A militant signaled and the shooting stopped immediately. Looking at the collapsed house turned into rubble covered by a thick cloud of dust rising into the night sky, he sneered. "Heh. Although I don't understand why Boss Du Meng ordered us to kill that girl and that brat, it really is a waste of ammunition and grenades." The amount of ammunition the four bosses had managed to obtain after raiding the local police station had been about 20,000 rounds along with a few grenades. However, after the constant confrontation against the zombies and the constant raids in search of resources, the arsenal had been greatly reduced and now there were just over 10,000 rounds of ammunition. After all, while it was true that zombies were slow and a shot in the head meant death, the militants were not soldiers with military training. They were just a random mafia gathering to fight. It was absolutely and utterly impossible that the militants, most of whom had never fired a gun before, could hit every shot. In fact, 99% of the time the bullets missed their target or hit other parts of the zombies' bodies and only 1% of the time did a bullet hit the brain accurately. Therefore, the waste of ammunition was incredibly high. It was precisely for this reason that the militants did not understand why Du Meng had sent more than a dozen gunmen and even grenades to a little girl's house. Bang! Suddenly, the dust burst open and rubble flew everywhere. The militants panicked and quickly raised their guns again, but all they saw was a sharp flash of light shining in the middle of the starless night. The militant who had previously spoken felt his world spinning and was shocked to see his body standing headless with blood gushing from his neck. His life was completely over even before his head touched the ground. Right behind the corpse, Bai Zimin was holding his immaculate Xianyuan sword in his right hand. In his embrace and resting on his left arm, little Luoning who was only 9 years old was sleeping soundly like a little angel. Even after the earlier shooting, the explosions of 4 grenades, and the collapse of the house, both Bai Zimin and Luoning were unscathed, and not even a fleck of dust had touched their bodies. "How scumbag do you have to be to target a little girl?" His cold voice rang out in the middle of the night and his indifferent eyes were demon-like from the militant's point of view. "Holy SHF fire!" A militant roared in fright and everyone began to shoot in a hurry. The muzzles of the Type 79 submachine guns spat bullet after bullet relentlessly in the direction of the 2 young people. No militant seemed concerned about the little girl or even the young man who was old enough to be the son of some of them. To survive such an earlier assault, it was obvious that the young man was not normal. Also, as a reminder, the militant's head and body in a pool of blood reminded them of a possible fate that none of them wanted to experience. Swoosh! The broken bronze bell flew out of Bai Zimin's pocket and hovered over his head. Before the bullets could reach him, a thin yellow membrane surrounded him and consequently little Luoning as well. Bang! 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 The bullets hit the thin magic barrier and sparks flew everywhere. However, to the horror of the militants, all the bullets were easily repelled and the barrier did not even flinch. In fact, the barrier had weakened after being fiercely shaken by 4 grenades at such close range. However, it still had enough power to withstand normal bullets without any problem. "Damn monster! Kill him!" Another militant roared and shouted as he fired with bloodshot eyes. When he exhausted his magazine, scared he began to search for the second one in his clothes with trembling hands. However, before he could change magazines, Bai Zimin appeared before him and slashed horizontally. The militant's body was cut off at the waist and his organs flew everywhere along with streams of hot blood. Because he had not yet died, the militant felt the most dreadful pain he had ever felt or imagined in his entire life. "Arg! It hurts! Kill me! Please kill me!" he pleaded between cries that terrified his comrades. Bai Zimin ignored him and let him suffer until the last moment. His leg muscles swelled and with a loud bang the ground beneath his feet exploded as he disappeared from his position and appeared in front of another militant, slashing horizontally without mercy. Just as before, the militant let out a cry that seemed to come from deep within his soul as he fell to the ground cut in 2 halves. Monster! Run away! Please don't kill me. We were just following orders to survive. Arg! Bai Zimin defied the rain of bullets with a cold gaze and like a demon reaped the lives of his enemies one by one. No matter how many times the militants pleaded, none of them received even a shred of his mercy and were cut in two. Mercy? Compassion? Was he really a monster? It was clear to Bai Zimin that he had committed many cruel things since the apocalypse erupted with the arrival of the soul record on Earth. However, even he had limits. He did not force himself on any woman, he did not unjustly mistreat anyone to release his frustrations or fears, nor did he abuse children. However, the militants in front of him were so cruel that even knowing that they were going to kill a girl as young as 9 years old, they did not even hesitate. They didn't even know if she had done anything evil, but as they received the order and in order to live more comfortably, without hesitation they raised their guns and threw grenades into the house of a defenseless girl. Who was the monster really? Bai Zimin believed that, at least in this case, he was not the bad guy. A few seconds later, the sounds of gunshots and pleading cries had completely stopped. The ground 100 meters around the now collapsed small house had become a bloody mess. 12 decapitated corpses cut from the waist down lay in disarray as they bathed in their own still warm blood. Blood will, 12%/50%. Bai Zimin was standing surrounded by corpses. Regardless of whether he looked left or right, all his dark eyes saw was crimson red along with the reflection of the full moon in the pools of blood. His sword, his clothes, his body, or Luo Ning's, everything was in perfect condition in contrast to the situation around them. Let's get this over with and then go to sleep. Bai Zimin looked in the direction of the village center and his eyes flashed coldly. With steady steps, his lonely back soon disappeared into the surrounding trees. Behind him, 12 lifeless people and the destruction of the surroundings were the only proof of what had happened here. Inside the villa where Yaqigong resided, he and Du Meng were standing together in front of the window as if they were appreciating the full moon high in the sky surrounded by thick dark clouds. Yaqigong frowned and asked in a deep voice that only when he was worried about something he used, "Are you sure about what you said?" Today in the afternoon and after delegating approximately 20 men to protect specific checkpoints that would facilitate the defense of the central area of the village in the direction of the mansion, Du Meng arrived at this place and told Yaqigong that he might have found the source of his anxiety. Du Meng was a quiet man and rarely said anything except when it was necessary. Therefore, Yaqigong did not believe that he was joking or saying things without an important purpose or something to rely on. "I'm sure." Du Meng nodded. His rough but at the same time sharp voice was extremely strange and unpleasant to listen to. That little girl had a milk carton in her hand. Where would a 9-year-old girl get something as valuable as milk from? Indeed. That's strange. Yaqigong nodded. Milk was a luxury these days and even he himself couldn't drink it every day at will, let alone a 9-year-old girl who couldn't even fend for herself. Du Meng continued, "After asking some men I found out that this girl is actually the younger sister of Luo Cheng, one of our armed men. If the milk was stolen by him, then the girl's death will be a punishment in the form of a warning. But if the milk was brought from outside by those 2 unknown young men, then they should be dead in no time." Yaqigong was silent before nodding appreciatively. Du Meng's words were cruel, but none of them were good men to begin with. Even before the arrival of the soul record, they had already committed several crimes and even killed some people. The sound of gunshots and explosions in the distance soon reached here and the two looked at each other. A few seconds later, the sound stopped and all was silent again. They should be dead. Du Meng concluded. However, Yaqigong shook his head and frowned. "Du Meng, you left someone guarding the arsenal of weapons and ammunition." "Only 2 men since the rest left with Lei Sui and Yang Pei. Besides the rest are..." "Fuck." Du Meng suddenly realized something and cursed before dashing towards the exit at full speed. Yaqigong took a deep breath and soon heard the sound of gunshots in the distance, getting closer and closer. His eyes flashed coldly and he turned around, walking towards the exit releasing an aura of murderous intent. Reaching the back, he approached a pile of junk cars and touched them while activating his metal control skill. Soon, the metal of the cars moved strangely, and as if it had life, it began to surround him completely. In a matter of seconds, Yaqigong had turned into a steel giant that was over 3 meters tall. Without saying a single word, he proceeded to walk with heavy steps towards the main gate of the villa. ******. On his way through the village, Bai Zimin did not meet any resistance. The survivors were trembling with fear and had locked themselves in their houses while clutching their heads or hugging each other. The sound of gunshots, the cries of pain, and the 4 explosions followed by the collapse of something of considerable size had scared everyone so that no one dared to even poke his head out of the window. From the moment the 4 bosses arrived in the village and took control, all the survivors knew that life at this point was worth less than a piece of stale bread and anyone could kill without too much consequence. After all, considering the situation in the outside world, who was going to punish a murderer? On the contrary, it was likely that such a killer would be accepted among the militants for daring to fight instead of being punished. Therefore, no one even dared to squeak and they remained silent, praying to God for their fates. When Bai Zimin reached the center of the village, the first thing that caught his eye was a luxurious 3-story building, surrounded by lights and extremely conspicuous in this place where everyone's lights were off. Although they had not come this far today, little Luoning had told him that the strongest boss lived in the most luxurious house in the center of the village. Therefore, Bai Zimin easily identified it as his main and final target. Blood will, 14%/50%. Bang! 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 The power boost provided by his passive second-order blood will skill was triggered by an extra 2% and Bai Zimin didn't even have time to react when a rain of bullets was directed in his direction. From the left, from the right, from the front, and even from behind. Placed at different points, 20 militants with machine guns or pistols fired mercilessly. Even without military training, with 20 machine guns firing at the same time, it was absolutely impossible to miss and not hit the enemy target, even a fly would be hit by at least a single bullet. However, Bai Zimin continued to walk undisturbed. When the bullets reached him, the broken bronze bell did not fly out of his pocket and the automatic protection effect was not activated. However, the bullets were stopped in mid-air by a barrier that could not be seen with the naked eye. "You can all go to hell," Bai Zimin muttered, and the reject ring in his left hand glowed slightly. Swoosh! 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 The militants did not know that all the bullets they were firing had been magically stopped in mid-air and continued firing, piling up more and more bullets. Before they could react, the bullets that were their allies suddenly turned around and shot out at a speed no slower than before, back at the militants. "Arg! Ah! Help me!" Amid cries of pain and despair, the militants were hit by at least a dozen shots each in different parts of the body. Arms, legs, abdomen, chest, shoulders, head, heart, etc. Some bullets even curved in the air while searching for the man with the gun that fired them, turning the different militants into sieves filled with holes and covering the ground with blood, brain parts, and even pieces of skull. Blood will, 32%/50%. The gunfire had not even persisted for 3 seconds and the 20 militants had been killed by Bai Zimin without even lifting a finger. Bai Zimin continued to move forward with the sleeping Luoning in his arms until he suddenly stopped when the ground beneath his feet began to shake softly and become heavier and heavier with every second. Soon, he understood the reason. "Are you Yaqigong? The strongest boss in this place?" Bai Zimin asked indifferently as he looked at the metal monster that was over 3 meters tall about 100 meters away. The giant surrounded by layers and layers of metal looked like a sci-fi robot but with no technology and just pure strength. Its arms were the size of a grown man and its legs were so wide that only 3 people together could wrap their outstretched arms around it. Moreover, just the pressure emitted by its overall size was enough to make most enemies sink in despair. "That's me." Bai Zimin heard the voice of a middle-aged man from inside the metal robot. Although it was a human's voice, due to the sheets of metal surrounding it sounded like there were several people inside as the echo rang out all over the place. "And who are you?" Ye Qigong asked, brimming with murderous intent. Even before the apocalypse, he had never been offended, and all those who tried had paid the consequences. After evolving through constantly absorbing soul power and acquiring skills, his self-confidence had become a lot higher. Although he knew that the young man in front of him was strong enough to defeat and kill a group of nearly 50 armed men and even survive the explosion of 4 hand grenades, Ye Qigong had such an ability as well. "Me." Bai Zimin stepped forward and coldly replied, "The person who took care of a small shrimp named Yang Pei. The person who slaughtered all the men who accompanied him. The strongest fighter in the group that killed the dog by the name of Lei Su. The boss of the man who is currently taking care of that little monkey Du Meng. But more importantly, the person who will kill you." Ye Qigong's heart shook in a whirlwind of churning emotions when he heard the young man's declaration before him. However, he did not have time to think too much as his passive skill danger sense caused his entire body to tremble in fear, and he unconsciously raised both of his mechanical arms in the shape of a cross covering in front of him. Bai Zimin appeared in front of the giant robot and swung his right fist forward without holding back in the slightest. Boom! Although Ye Qigong had managed to react quickly thanks to his passive skill danger sense and thanks to his own combat experience, even with the protection of layers upon layers of metal, he was unable to withstand the power of Bai Zimin's fist, boosted 32% by his blood will skill. The metal giant was sent flying backwards uncontrollably, losing several pieces of armor in the process. Bang! The outer wall separating the main mansion from the rest of the village was noisily smashed as Ye Qigong hit it violently. He couldn't help but cough out a mouthful of blood and his eyes flashed with disbelief. His first-order metal control skill allowed him to control metals almost at will, so he moved the armor with his skill, not his physical body. With this armor, even bullets would not be able to harm him in the slightest, and his total defense was simply terrifying. But even then, the after effects of the force resulting from the blow was not something his armor could withstand. Much less Bai Zimin's strength, which was greater than that of 20 grown men. This kind of strength was not as simple as 20 grown men hitting the same place with separate forces. All that strength was compressed into his body, and the power behind his fists was simply dreadful. Bai Zimin was about to charge forward, and even with little Luoning in his embrace, he was confident of ending his opponent's life easily. However, a magic circle appeared on the ground below him and he hurriedly dashed to the other side just in time. Bang! A large earth stake 2 meters high rose out of nowhere and pierced skyward. If he had taken a fraction of a second longer, the magic earth stake could have pierced his body. Ye Qigong was strong, however. He was different from Bai Zimin, who had faced death countless times after so many clashes against existences more powerful than him. Before Ye Qigong could even stand up completely, Bai Zimin's 201 agility points carried him Indiana a second right over the metal armor. With a gaze as cold as ice, he stomped down with all his might. Boom! The ground caved in, and the metal armor's chest area sank down horribly, unable to withstand the pressure. Inside, Ye Qigong felt his world spun around and began to cough blood uncontrollably at the same time as blood came out of his ears and eyes. I heard that you like to mistreat people just to release your frustration? I also heard that you have abused several women in the same way that your 3 dogs have. The demon's voice rang in his ears, and when he looked up to the sky he saw that Bai Zimin had already jumped more than 5 meters high and was currently pointing at him with his right hand. Let your sins burn. In hell! Bai Zimin sneered, and the blazing ring on his index finger glowed with a crimson shade. Under Ye Qigong's terrified eyes, a blaze of fiery crimson fire flew in his direction at full speed. Even from afar, he could sense death as his passive skill danger sense urged him to flee in a hurry. Unfortunately, the current him had already been mortally injured by Bai Zimin's fierce attacks. His power and his speed and concentration to control his skill had been severely affected as a result. Crimson flames surrounded the 3-meter metal armor completely, and Ye Qigong's howl coming from the flaming giant echoed throughout the village. Standing several meters away on the roof of a 2-story house, Bai Zemin looked at the scene in front of him and listened to the cries and curses of his enemy with indifference. In his cold dark eyes, the crimson flames reflected like the representation of hell on earth, but even then his emotions were not moved in the slightest. The metal began to melt from the magical flames coming from the blazing ring, and even before they reached Yekigong inside it, only the heat had begun to burn his skin and deform his body horribly. The feeling of being burned alive was so unbearable that even he, who had been tortured once in the past and had his face cut off, could not bear it. Because activating his metallic control skill required concentration, he could not send the metal armor anywhere else and could only cry out in pain as he writhed all over the ground. The dark starless night, with only the light of the full moon as witness, blazed with crimson flames as the piercing howl of a human became unbearably terrifying, scaring all the survivors who heard it. About a minute later, the flames were completely extinguished and the metal giant had melted into a liquid puddle. As for Yekigong, there was no trace of his existence. You have obtained the soul power of Yekigong level 22. Blood will, 33%/50%. With his sword at his waist and a little girl sleeping in his embrace, Bai Zemin coldly snorted before walking towards the place. The strongest boss of the four had died just like that, with only 2 strikes from Bai Zemin and the activation of a treasure that made him suffer the horror of hell on earth. This entity called Soul Record really is terrifying. Bai Zemin looked at the 3 objects before him with a complicated look and sighed. Even after the metal armor was turned into a pool of liquid by the crimson flames coming from his blazing ring, and even after an evolved person like Yekigong was turned into mortal remains, these 3 treasures still remained intact and resplendent. The 3 treasures were a bracelet, a pendant, and a skill scroll. Because Yekigong's soul power was much weaker than his soul power, who had already reached level 35, Bai Zemin did not believe that after killing him he could obtain any loot. However, the 2 accessories were probably belongings that Yekigong had obtained throughout his hunts and battles. This was confirmed when Bai Zemin inspected the information on the bracelet and discovered that it was actually a rare grade treasure earth bracelet, one exactly like the one he had. Because each person could use 2 bracelets and he did not have a different one, he also equipped this bracelet on his opposite hand, which increased his magic by another plus 10 points. Spiritual earring, rare grade treasure. When equipped it increases magic and mana by plus 10. Automatically protects the user from 3 spiritual attacks per day. Current status, 3/3. Bai Zemin did not have this item, so without hesitation he pierced his left ear and the small earring with a tiny emerald shone on it. Although it was not particularly his taste, becoming powerful was the main thing and he didn't care too much about his appearance anyway. To his surprise, when he saw his reflection on the blade of the sword, he didn't look bad at all. The last item was actually something that surprised and delighted Bai Zemin beyond words, as he always wanted such a skill. Danger Sense, unclassified passive skill, level 5, warns the user by sending nerve signals to the body whenever his/her life is in mortal danger. His eyes glittered and without hesitation, he decided to learn the skill on the scroll for himself. The scroll disappeared from his hands in particles of light that soon entered his body, and deep in his soul, a new rune of yellow color with reddish tones at the edges was formed. With this new skill, his survivability had skyrocketed immensely. While it was true that his broken bronze bell could automatically protect him, the treasure energy was not infinite, and in the event of losing its power, Bai Zemin would have to rely only on himself until he could use it again. Therefore, the passive skill Danger Sense suited him perfectly. Bai Zemin scanned the surroundings before looking at the girl sleeping in his embrace, and a smile slipped onto his lips. If anyone saw him at this moment, they would certainly not be able to associate him with that indifferent face that in less than 5 minutes had claimed the lives of more than 30 people. Unfortunately, there was no one to appreciate it. Du Meng surveyed the scene before him with eyes filled with burning anger that he seemed unable to contain. Along one corridor were 2 corpses whose heads had been blown to pieces. Flesh, pulp and blood had stained the white walls with red, and the scared sobs of some kneeling maidservants could be heard clearly amidst the sepulchral silence. Big Brother Bai really is a genius. At the end of the corridor, in front of a wide-open door, Zhongde looked at the slender man across the corridor and smiled. I wonder why no one knew him before all this chaos completely erupted. He continued as if talking to himself. Even without his current strength, his intelligence doesn't lose to President Shangwen's or Chen He's. He should have been able to stand higher on the boards. Du Meng looked at the desert eagle in the burly young man's right hand and frowned. That was the only desert eagle they had obtained from the police station, and it was one of the most powerful firearms they currently had with a 12.7 mm caliber, but now it had fallen into enemy hands. Zhongde suddenly raised the weapon and shot without warning. The sound of the shot echoed through the walls, and the maidservants in the place screamed in fright, but none dared to move for fear of being shot dead. As for Du Meng, he had disappeared as if he had vanished into thin air. Zhongde was startled, and before he could react he felt his right arm being severed by a sharp object. Hastily he took a step back, avoiding the cut for the most part but still being slightly slashed. Blood flowed slowly from the wound, staining the ground and his clothes. Swoosh! 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 The wind howled and Zhongde suffered several bloody wounds. Although he managed to avoid fatal wounds, his arms and some parts of his body had slight cuts from a knife or other sharp object. Du Meng was undoubtedly stronger than him, and in a one-on-one battle, it was impossible for Zhongde to defeat him. However, in this narrow corridor that Zhongde had chosen to fight in, things were different. Bang! 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 Zhongde raised the Desert Eagle and fired 8 times in a row in different directions and completely emptying the magazine. Ugh! From his right side, a groan followed by a bloodstain immediately attracted his attention, and Zhongde without hesitation rushed forward, punching with all his strength. Bang! After being injured by a bullet, Du Meng was struck and sent flying before slamming into the opposite wall. His active first-order skill invisibility was deactivated, and with a hate-filled expression, he looked at the slowly approaching young man. Bathed in his own blood, Zhongde looked at the bullet hole in Du Meng's abdomen and also noticed that his chest had sunk at an odd angle after receiving his previous fist. If not for the close place, Du Meng would undoubtedly have been the victor. However, after Luoning told everything she knew about him, Bai Zimin easily found his fatal weakness, and Zhongde defeated him after some difficulty. With such injuries, it was impossible for Du Meng to survive. Soon after, he coughed up blood along with several pieces of organs and died just like that, with his eyes wide open and filled with unreconciled hatred. Due to the difference in levels, Zhongde went straight up to level 18 and sighed as he leaned against the wall while slowly reloading the weapon in his hands and looked attentively at the maidservants of the place without saying a single word. Although his wounds were not serious, he was certainly losing a lot of blood, so it would be best not to move too much. Soon after, Bai Zimin appeared and chuckled, "Looks like you took a beating, eh? Zhongde." Zhongde rolled his eyes but smiled bitterly at the sight of the untouched Bai Zimin. Even with a little girl, he had killed all the enemy militants and had even taken out the strongest Yekigong. The difference was simply too great. After making sure that the injuries suffered by Zhongde were not serious, Bai Zimin looked at the few kneeling maidservants and said calmly, "All of you need not be so frightened. I don't plan to do anything bad to you in any way. My targets were Yekigong, Du Meng, Lei Su, and Yang Pei, the 4 leaders of this camp. Now that they are dead, I will be taking control of the village in their place." The maidservants looked at him with a touch of fear, but his words had managed to calm them down a bit. After all, the previous 4 leaders were not saints and had committed many heinous acts, so even if Bai Zimin did bad things, as long as he didn't kill them, these women would believe it was normal since they had seen such behavior from those in power for a whole week. A voluptuous woman with a slim aura of elegance stood up and while looking at Bai Zimin lowered her head politely, "My name is Qin Ming. May I know the gentleman's name?" "It is Bai Zimin." Bai Zimin replied in a deep voice as he looked at the woman about 9 or 10 years older than him. Not only was her body voluptuous, but her face could be considered a beauty if not for the small burn that had not yet healed at the edge of her lips, but even then, Qin Ming was a beauty in her own right. Before the apocalypse erupted with the appearance of the Soul Record, Qin Ming was a successful businesswoman within Rulan sub-district with assets exceeding 3 million yuan. However, 2 days after the apocalypse, she fell into the hands of Du Meng during a raid on a small village several kilometers away. Because of her natural beauty, Lei Su had wanted to force himself upon her, but she refused and fought until Du Meng stopped him. However, before letting her go, Lei Su had taken it upon himself to brand her with a boiling match, thus damaging her beauty as a warning. After a moment's hesitation, Qin Ming gritted her teeth and decided to bet everything. Leader Bai, since this will be your new settlement, I think you should gather the survivors to make your rules known. Oh! Bai Zimin looked at her with a tinge of surprise in his eyes but quickly understood what she meant. Not only was it necessary to change the name of this camp but it was also necessary to make his face known among the survivors. In addition, Bai Zimin also needed to recruit men to arm them properly and start delegating tasks. Bai Zimin smiled and nodded in satisfaction. Qin Ming, from today you will be my housekeeper. Gather the maidservants and the women of the leaders. Then take them to Yekigong's villa, it will be my new home. Qin Ming was elated at the new position and quickly nodded hurriedly before looking at the rest of the women who looked at her enviously and began to give orders. Because of her previous job, it was easy for her to guide and take the role of a small leader, so soon all the women began to move in an orderly fashion. Shang Guanbing Shui and the rest drove the buses, the big Dongfeng truck, and the various pickup trucks through the camp. The male and female students as well as the teachers had looks of amazement as they looked at the more than 700 survivors standing around the well-lit central square. Amazing! Wu Yujun exclaimed as she looked at the corpses of the militants. He alone really managed to fight and kill so many gunmen. Shang Guanbing Shui's beautiful eyes also had a strange glint in them as she looked at the scene. She had faced a group of just over a dozen men armed with machine guns and rifles, so she knew that even with her constant evolution it was not simple to defeat an armed squad. However, Bai Zimin had managed to wipe out more than 30 by himself. The reason for her surprise stemmed from the fact that he did not possess a skill like her first order ice maker, capable of defending and attacking at the same time. At least, she had not seen him use one. However, after remembering the magic treasure broken bronze bell, it all made sense. After the students disembarked the buses, they were ordered to stand up with the rest of the village survivors, so they all had no choice but to stand in the midst of people who were clearly not in a good situation. It was only then that several of them realized that from today on, their lives could take as big a turn as when the Soul Record showed up unannounced. Many even regretted it, but it was too late. Standing on a small stage made of wood, Bai Zimin looked at the 1,000+ people with an indifferent gaze. However, only he knew that he was not really calm at all. A step behind him, Lily watched the scene with a small smile as if she was having a lot of fun. Now do you understand why I wanted you to conquer as many places as you can? Bai Zimin heard the succubus' seductive voice in his head like the devil's whisper. Bai Zimin looked at her out of the corner of his eye and took a deep breath as he read the messages flashing in his retina. The number of living beings under your command have exceeded 1,000. You can now choose the lower leader subclass. Subclass. Bai Zimin's main class was currently Blood Berserker, and while it was true that this would change once he reached the second order, the rest of his classes would remain somewhat similar to the current one but stronger. However, a subclass was something he hadn't expected since Lilith had never mentioned it to him. A subclass was something that helped role-playing video game players to get some extra power without interfering with the main class or the player's goals. Although generally a subclass was a lot weaker than the main class, the extra help was always good because if two beings with a class of the same type faced each other, the one with a better subclass would be the victor in the end. Bai Zimin did not hesitate and accepted the lower leader subclass right away. You have successfully acquired the lower leader subclass. A leader is one who leads his/her followers to success and victory. You still have a long way to go towards the path of a true king. Lower leader, increase the total power by 1% and another 0.1% for every 1,000 people under your rule. You have the ability to name 2 people loyal follower. Those who become your loyal follower will never be able to betray you, and in life and death situations will be able to use 5% of your overall strength. To evolve to the next tier you need to have 10,000 people under your rule. Bai Zimin did his best to stay calm as he knew he was currently being watched by more than 1,000 people. However, it was extremely difficult for him to do this as this new subclass had opened up a world of possibilities for him. With the new and unexpected acquisition of the lower leader subclass, to say that in front of Bai Zimin a new world with infinite doors representing countless possibilities had appeared was not an exaggeration in the least. The power that the lower leader subclass provided him at the moment was truly pitiful and could practically be easily ignored. However, this was so at this moment only because Bai Zimin had a total of just over 1,000 people under his control. But what would happen when that number grew? What if at some point Bai Zimin came to control the entire Yangqing district? How about all of Beijing? How about all of China? Even more terrifying. How about the whole planet Earth? Bai Zimin's subclass was currently at the lowest possible point, but when he had 10,000 survivors under his rule the subclass would evolve to the next level and the power provided would probably increase by a notch. But the real increase in power was with the survivors. For every 1,000 survivors, Bai Zimin's power would increase by 0.1%. Such an amount might not be too much, but if at some point he could once again unite all of China's surviving inhabitants under his flag, the increase in power would undoubtedly be massive. Bai Zimin shuddered at the thought of such terrifying entities as the various leaders of the higher existences. They already had their own armies with hundreds of thousands and even millions of terrifying beings and at the same time received a great boost of power due to their positions as leaders and rulers. Seeing that time passed and he still remained silent, Sheng Guanbing Shui and the rest who were standing on the stage a short distance away frowned, wondering if there was something wrong. Forget it. Let's focus on what we can fix and leave what is beyond our control for later. Bai Zimin sighed secretly and shook his head slightly before turning his attention to the survivors who were still staring at him waiting for his words. These people, as useless as some might be, were now a treasure in Bai Zimin's eyes. If he wanted to help Lilith and achieve his own ever higher ambitions, he needed power, and the survivors were the fuel that could give him power just by being there. My name is Bai Zimin and I am the strongest person in this place. He began his monologue with a deep voice and a cold gaze. I have already taken care of killing the 4 previous leaders of this place and now my people and I are claiming this village as our temporary base. Hearing that the previous village leaders had been killed, the survivors muttered under their breath but did not seem too surprised. After all, the battle between Bai Zimin and the militants as well as Ye Qigong had been heard by all. The gunshots and explosions had made it clear that there was a terrifying battle raging, and since the unknown young man was on the stage but none of the previous bosses were anywhere to be seen, it was easy to assume what had happened in the end. Starting from today, each of you will receive relief rations consisting of 3 bowls of gruel per day. If you want to eat better or if you want to be able to eat your fill, then you will have to work to earn it. Bai Zimin declared coldly and narrowed his eyes. I won't let anyone starve, but I hate leeches. At the slightest case of disobedience, social disorder, rape, street violence, or homicide, that person will be executed without mercy. Although the survivors were a treasure to him, firm rules were needed, and this was even more so in a world that was filled with chaos as Earth currently was. Therefore, Bai Zimin could not afford to waver with his attitude even if he had acquired a subclass. Although his words were somewhat cruel, none of the survivors seemed upset, on the contrary, they all had glints of joy in their eyes. After all, before they could barely eat a bowl of gruel under the rule of Ye Qigong and the other 3 bosses, but now that Bai Zimin was taking over they could all eat much more. If anyone is dissatisfied, you can take your personal belongings and leave the village at will. Bai Zimin pointed out indifferently. If you live under my protection and eat my food, then you will obey my orders. Now, you may all disperse and return to your homes. Tomorrow at sunrise all those who are interested in getting a job or becoming part of the new army troops should congregate at this very place. Leaving those words behind, Bai Zeman ignored the applause and even exclamations of joy and walked off the stage. Everyone was ecstatic. Especially when they heard that everyone could get jobs to eat better and even had the opportunity to join the army troops of the village and get some firearms. In this new world, firearms were the easiest and most efficient source of protection for the survivors. Therefore, Bai Zeman's words had tempted hundreds of men and women. Under the leadership of his new housekeeper, Qin Ming, Bai Zeman was guided to the main village. On the other hand, Shang Guan Bing Shuet, Wu Yujun, Gao Min, Li Na, and Fan Wu, would be sharing Du Meng's villa. As friends, it was natural to live together, and since the villa was large enough to accommodate a dozen people, there would be no problem. As for Chen he had Lei Su's villa to himself. Different women had been pre-arranged as maids for the different villas. These women who had been forced by the different bosses or used and then thrown aside were delighted, as they would not only be safer living under the same roof as strong people, but they could also receive better treatment and eat better food than the rest of the survivors. Because Luo Cheng and Luo Ning's house had been destroyed by the militants who had raided during the night, a house closer to the center of the village had been quickly arranged for both of them. The girl had easily entered Bai Zeman's heart, as her innocence and purity reminded him of his younger sister Meng Qi. It was also for this reason that he wanted her to be closer to his grasp, and fortunately the girl had been sleeping until now, so she was not too aware of the disaster, or else who knows what her reaction would be. "Why didn't you name me your housekeeper?" Lilith asked with an adorable pout as she bounced up and down on the comfy sprung bed. She had already returned to her original form, and her overwhelming charm along with her two moving mountains was simply irresistible. Bai Zeman couldn't help but let his eyes wander to her breast for a moment before returning to her face and saying through gritted teeth, "You little minx! If I had appointed you my housekeeper, wouldn't you send me to my own death? What is all this master bullshit?" Just imagining the seductive Lilith calling him master made his blood burn to the brim. The next day, in the center of the village square, several tables were set up with a group of people behind them. Gao Min looked at the nearly 1,000 survivors surrounding the place and felt a little awkward. They all looked like hungry wolves ready to pounce on their prey at any moment. However, she gritted her teeth and endured as she shouted loudly, "From now on, everyone can approach a table and announce what kind of knowledge you have. From mechanics and blacksmithing to general medicine, anything that can help will be welcome, and you will be rewarded based on your work." Indeed, these survivors were hungry wolves. However, the reason why they did not dare to cause any disturbance was to be attributed to Fu Suifeng, Cai Jingii, Kong Lan, Zhongde, Luo Cheng, and the other militants who had decided to follow Bai Zeman. All of them were holding a gun and observing the surroundings coldly. If anyone tried to be too rough, they had Bai Zeman's order to punish the offender without hesitation. On the other side of the square, Wu Yujun stood in the center and announced in a melodious voice, "All those whose age is between 18 and 40 who wish to apply to join the new army troops, come to me. You must announce your name, occupation prior to the arrival of the soul record, and your physique must be in good condition to fight at any time." The crowd immediately became agitated and hundreds of people began to line up. Due to the sheer number of people, it was impossible for there not to be some disorder, even more so considering that everyone was clear that it was impossible to arm all of them, so no one wanted to be left out because they were too slow. All those who skip the line or push will be rejected immediately and will also have no chance of getting a regular job. When Fan Wu shouted those words, the small chaos that threatened to spread immediately calmed down and the survivors began to move orderly with eyes filled with dread. None of them wanted to miss out on a golden opportunity like this. It was only then, when order settled down, that the first day of recruitment officially began. ******. Meanwhile, on a highway on the way east of the newly named beginning village, 2 modified buses, 2 tractor trailers, and a cargo truck moved forward as a lone unit, defying the dangers lurking everywhere. Sitting in one of the front seats of the first bus, Bai Zimin looked out the window with his face resting on one hand. As he watched the scenery pass by, his eyes flashed with a complicated glint. Sitting next to him, Lilith in her lily form occasionally looked at him out of the corner of her eye with a small glint of concern. But even she didn't know what to say, so she simply stayed silent, trying to support him with her presence. The reason why Bai Zimin was somewhat depressed was because they were currently moving towards the place where he worked before the apocalypse fully broke out. Because they needed more advanced tools to be able to work better in modifying vehicles and to repair those that were damaged but could be useful, even to dismantle vehicles they needed the right tools to avoid damaging the different parts. Besides, he also wanted to obtain the blacksmithing tools from the old man if possible. That was precisely why he, Chen He, and Shang Guanbing Shui along with other survivors who would do the logistical work moved to obtain these resources. The fact that the three strongest leaders were moving showed how important this move was. After all, if they obtained the tools, would finally be able to start working with the bodies of the mutated beasts and the evolved first-order beasts. Although Bai Zimin could not say that he and the other employees of the place were like family, he had a very good relationship with all of them. Especially with the old blacksmith elder who was the one who had introduced him to the job when he needed it. The man was over 60 years old, but Bai Zimin could tell that he really appreciated him. He even taught him many things about blacksmithing, and even when Bai Zimin didn't understand or made many mistakes, the old man always smiled and told him that everything was okay, that for the next one he could surely do it far better. It was precisely thanks to him that Bai Zimin had the option to obtain the main class blacksmith in his evolution to first order. Approximately 20 minutes later, the small convoy stopped in front of a single-story building with an extension of several hundred meters in length and width. The sound of the engines had attracted several surrounding zombies, totaling more than 70 beings carrying a deadly infection. Although they were only 3 people, the 3 of them had already defied hordes of hundreds of zombies, and the number of enemies that had perished at their hands totaled at least tens of thousands if not more. After a quick 2 to 3 minutes work, all the zombies were decapitated with ease. Bai Zimin and the other 2 had firearms, but considering the shortage of ammunition as well as the various setbacks that the sound of gunshots could bring, the 3 of them eliminated the zombies with bladed weapons. Even Chen He wielded a Xianyuan sword to decapitate zombies and was surprisingly good with the sword. He had obviously not only trained his archery skills throughout his life. With a Type 79 submachine gun slung over his shoulder, a Desert Eagle and a Xianyuan sword at his waist, it could be said that Bai Zimin was armed to the teeth. He stared at the broken glass of the workshop for several seconds before he began to walk inside without saying a word. Shang Guanbing Shui, Chen He, and Lilith followed closely behind. Lilith ignored the strange looks she was receiving from Shang Guanbing Shui and Chen He, focusing on the back of the young man in front of her. Bai Zimin walked without stopping, turning into some corridors and passing some doors. Anyone could tell that he knew the place well enough to move around as if it were his own home. But how could he not know the place? After all, this had been the place where he had been working for almost 3 years. Along the way there were several bloodstains, torn clothes, and even some iron tools with bloodstains and human flesh stuck on the metal. Bang! Arriving in front of a sheet metal door, Bai Zimin kicked it noisily as if to announce that he was there. However, upon seeing the sight inside, he froze for a moment before sighing with slightly sad eyes. Less than 10 meters away, an old man whose hair had turned completely white could be seen sitting in a chair. His clothes were in a bad state and there was a large bloody wound on his right arm. Hearing the sound of the door banging open, the old man staggered to his feet as he grunted almost inaudibly. Bai Zimin looked at the old man's lifeless and completely white eyes and he could not help but sigh inwardly again, and although he knew to some extent that something like this could happen, what he did not expect was that it would be more difficult to accept than he initially thought. Since the beginning of the apocalypse, Bai Zimin had danced hand in hand with death on many occasions, and there were even several times when his life hung in the balance. However, with effort, he gritted his teeth and managed to defeat all his enemies. From normal zombies and evolved zombies to mutated and evolved beasts, even other humans. All that existence that somehow blocked his path was eradicated with his own hands. Therefore, seeing an acquaintance and even something dear to him having been turned into a zombie, the shock Bai Zemin received was greater than expected, as it made him realize that although he was strong, he was still as weak as any other human being to cases like the one in front of him. Perhaps being able to sense his complex emotions and his declining mood, Lilith hugged him gently from behind and rested her head on his back. This surprised him and the others, but none of them had time to think too much. Shang Guanbing Shui looked at Bai Zemin with complicated eyes as she naturally realized that the old man and he must have had a good relationship in the past. An idea flashed in her mind and raised both hands as she pointed forward. Freeze! Her cold voice echoed off the walls and a blast of terrifying frost shot forward from her body. Her face turned slightly pale, but her expression did not change. Under the eyes of Chen He, Bai Zemin, and Lilith, the old man's infected body froze into a frost statue. From head to toe, completely frozen. She clenched both fists and with a soft pop, the frost statue exploded into tiny pieces of ice with a size and thickness similar to a hair. The faint rays of light shining through the broken window shone on the tiny flakes floating gently in the air, creating a wonderful view difficult to describe in mere words. When all the flakes fell to the ground, Bai Zemin looked at her gratefully and nodded. After all, what she had done was actually very kind. Not only had she prevented him from killing a familiar person with his own hands, but she had also given the old man eternal rest in such a beautiful way. Bai Zemin soon made some effort and pushed the whole previous matter to the back of his head. Although a bit of rest to clear his mind and think better about what to do next would be good for him, it was also very clear to him that stopping was the same as giving the opportunity for other existences to devour him. With no other option and now even more motivated to cross the Yanqing district and reach the Chongping district to join his family. The previous case had not caused Bai Zemin's faith and trust in his loved ones to waver, it only motivated him to work even harder to achieve his goal of reaching them as soon as possible. Under his orders, the survivors began to carry different tools to the cargo truck and tractor trailers. The survivors of the beginning village knew very well that working for Bai Zemin and the others meant better meals and the possibility to eat their fill, so once the surrounding zombies were eliminated, they all began to work vigorously. Roar! Suddenly there was a thunderous roar in the distance that startled the survivors. The ground began to shake lightly and little by little the rumbling became more prominent, indicating the approach of something of considerable size. About 200 meters away, several trees were knocked down and under the terrified eyes of the survivors, a boar over 5 meters tall that seemed to be made of iron charged forward fiercely. At the sight of the humans, the beast's eyes turned red and it roared again as it charged forward with determination. The panicked survivors began to scream and dropped their tools in an attempt to flee. Bang! Bai Zemin shot into the air several times and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Stay where you are, damn it! If you stay away from here, by the time I kill this fucking pig you'll all be thrown out of the village." At the sound of gunfire and hearing his clearly angry voice as well as his threatening words, the survivors stopped trying to flee in disorder but still fled into the building to seek cover. Chen He narrowed his eyes and raised his Type 85 sniper in the direction of the giant boar. The Type 85 sniper was an antique semi-automatic weapon from 1963, but even today it was sometimes used by the army because of its power. Although it could not compare to the power of some of the same type of more modern weapons, it was one of the weapons with the greatest penetrating power among those currently available in Bai Zemin's group. Bang! Bang! In a second, Chen He opened fire twice. He was smart and knew that the giant boar's defense would be amazing, one only needed to pay attention to the metallic sheen of its scales to come to such a simple conclusion. Therefore, he took special aim at the beast's two eyes. However, what happened next was beyond everyone's expectations. When the two 7.62 x 54 mm armor-piercing bullets were just a few centimeters away from hitting the beast, a strange energy invisible to the naked eye seemed to distort, decreasing the power of the bullets enormously and slowing their speed, which gave the giant boar enough time to close both eyes. Tink! Tink! Both bullets fell to the ground after a slight sound of metal hitting metal. What? Shang Guanbing Shui's eyes flashed with disbelief and her small mouth slightly opened in complete shock at what she had just witnessed. Chen He sucked in a breath of cold air and unconsciously took a step back. Even Bai Zimin himself was astonished. I told you so. Lilith's voice sounded inside his head. First-order existences are almost immune to firearms developed with this world's technology, and probably only those with weaker defense are afraid of them. Only heavy weapons are a real threat to them. Bai Zimin took a deep breath and without warning burst forward with an astonishing speed that no survivor could understand or glimpse. As the giant boar charged like an unstoppable locomotive, an ant-sized existence flashed before their crimson eyes. With no intention of stopping, it charged even more ferociously. Unfortunately, while it was true that Bai Zimin was incomparable to the overall size of the giant boar, the power his small body possessed was no joke. He raised his Xianyuan sword high and slashed fiercely downward as if to cut the giant boar in two. When the sword blade connected against the beast's body, a thunderous explosion reverberated everywhere and the ground shook fiercely. The giant boar roared painfully as it was forced to retreat. Right in the center of its forehead, its scales cracked and a great torrent of blood gushed out from the open flesh, staining its entire face and giving it a horrifying appearance. Bai Zimin himself felt his arms numb after the strike. But this was because the sword in his hands no longer had the ability to pierce through the enemy's defenses before him. The only reason he had managed to wound the monster was because he had monstrous strength. However, as a consequence, his arms suffered a bit. The giant boar's eyes flashed strangely and its scales suddenly took on a slight glow that was stronger than before. A first-order existence with a defensive active skill. Bai Zimin immediately concluded and was about to continue when a blast of frost flew past him. The giant boar's body became much slower, and if one looked closely one would easily discover chunks of ice on its legs, knees, back, even its tail. Looking out of the corner of his shoulder, he saw Shang Guanbing Shui gritting her teeth and relentlessly channeling her skill. These kinds of beasts were her nemesis, as her ice skill did not have a destructive power high enough to break through a defense as strong as that of the giant boar. Without pausing to give the enemy time to react and seizing the opportunity, Bai Zimin jumped high into the sky and soared almost 7 meters in less than a second. He united both fists and punched mercilessly downward. Boom! After such a horrendous blow, a huge shock wave spread outward with the place hit by Bai Zimin as the center, and even some nearby trees were shattered by the aftershock of the attack. The giant boar's eyes quivered and it opened its maw to howl in pain, but all that came out of its mouth was a large amount of fresh blood along with several pieces of flesh coming from its organs that had been fiercely shaken by the previous blow. As the creature fell to the ground, Bai Zimin raised the Xianyuan sword and began to slash as if he had gone mad. 1, 2, 3. In just a matter of a second, he had already slashed more than 50 times with all his strength. The giant boar didn't even have time to cry out as its brain was turned to pulp from the outside and its skull sank inward with blood gushing out endlessly. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Reinforced Iron Boar level 49. Health plus 20, Stamina plus 15, Strength plus 8. You have leveled up and reached level 36. You have gained. You have leveled up and reached level 37. You have gained 2 status points to distribute freely. When the reinforced iron boar fell, the survivors who had sought shelter inside the building looked at the young man standing on the back of the huge creature with eyes filled with disbelief. Before this, the survivors had occasionally seen Ye Qigong, Du Meng, Lei Su, and Yang Pei activating their skills to make demonstrations of the supernatural power they possessed. In that way they would not only be able to urge more people to fight but also be able to show the difference in power, instilling fear in them. However, this was the first time they had seen someone so powerful. Everyone knew instinctively that if the reinforced iron boar appeared in the village and launched a charge-type attack, then no one would be able to stop its wild madness. Even the 4 previous leaders would have to flee or die. When the survivors saw the skills and monstrous strength of the 4 leaders back then they felt fear. But when they witnessed Bai Zimin's display of power, what they felt mostly was gratitude, surprise, and reverence. This was because when the power between two beings reached a point where it was simply impossible to comprehend, fear, envy, or hatred automatically turned into reverence and admiration. Humans were greedy and envious by nature, but didn't they worship different gods? This was because the difference in power in their minds between them and those existences was simply impossible to compare, so it made no sense to be envious. This was a similar case. Bai Zimin looked at the Xianyuan sword in his right hand and sighed. He really needed a new weapon since the strength of his current sword did not have the ability to pierce the defenses of enemies above level 40, and even when it managed to pierce their defenses he needed to consume large amounts of stamina. At least for now he would have to make do with the sword, as it was not easy to obtain a new weapon stronger than his current one. After all, the Xianyuan sword was a rare grade treasure and at the top of its category, therefore at least a magic grade treasure was necessary to surpass it. Bai Zimin circled around the beast's corpse several times and found a red orb and a skill scroll. Piercing glove. Normal treasure attacks performed with this weapon allow the user to pierce through the defense of almost any enemy below level 25. When equipped, strength plus 5. Wild charge, unranked active skill, level 5, turn into a shadow capable of traveling 10 meters in a straight line within 0.01 seconds. This skill can only be used once every 2 minutes. After thinking for a moment, Bai Zimin decided to learn the wild charge skill. The scroll in his hands disappeared into particles of light and a rune with the drawing of a bull formed deep within his soul. You have learned an active external skill. You can learn 3 additional external skills. Good job! A cheerful voice brought him out of his inner thoughts, and as looked ahead he saw Shangguan Bingshuet, Chen He, and Lilith slowly approaching. Bai Zimin smiled slightly and nodded to Lilith, who had praised him and was looking at him with a bright smile. Shangguan Bingshuet even raised an eyebrow at their exchange. Even a fool could tell that the relationship between the two of them was anything but normal. Maid? More than that, they look like a couple or close friends. Chen He whispered under his breath. Although it was a small whisper, it was impossible for it to escape the ears of people strong as the others, let alone from such a close distance. Bai Zimin ignored him and threw the piercing glove to Shangguan Bingshuet since he had one and since she had done her part, deserved something too. She took the treasure without saying a word and nodded towards him. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The survivors finished carrying the 2 tractor trailers with mechanics tools and blacksmith tools that were used in ancient times. While there were modern tools for blacksmithing, the old man liked the ancient methods of forging, as he always told Bai Zimin that by relying too much on technology one's skill would begin to rust. Because Bai Zimin together with Shangguan Bingshuet and Chen He had moved the giant corpse of the reinforced iron boar to the Dongfeng truck, they had no choice but to look for 2 other trucks nearby to transport the rest of the stuff. Even with the 3 of them together it was almost impossible to lift the body of the beast, and they had to do it bit by bit, taking them almost 2 hours, as it was not only incredibly heavy, but they also had to be careful or the truck would be crushed by the size and weight of the first-order creature. When Bai Zimin and the rest arrived at the beginning village it was already past noon. What is that? My god! It looks like a mythological beast. They even hunted such a terrifying monster. Due to its size, it was impossible to hide the body of the reinforced iron boar. When the few survivors who were walking around the village aimlessly or those who were in the square registering to try to get a job saw the 4-meter beast being carried and the dried blood on its body, they couldn't help but be scared and shocked. The reverence, as well as the gratitude of being under the protection of such powerful people, added another notch. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Inside the villa that was used as a meeting hall, Bai Zimin was sitting on a sofa with a frown on his face as he looked at the radio in front of him. On the sides, Shangguan Bingshuet, Chen He, and Wu Yujun, who had temporarily stopped enlisting, were looking at the radio and at him intermittently. This is Mayor Bai Yang of Baikwun Sub-District. I hope that you, who are listening to this broadcast, are safe and secure. In case you need shelter, food, security, the government in conjunction with the military troops of Baekwan Sub-District have managed to establish a safe zone in the area between Rulan Sub-District and Baekwan Sub-District of Yanqing District. The arms of the government are open to welcome you at all times. A recorded transmission that discussed a little about the world situation was constantly repeated from the satellite radio. Bai Zimin's eyes had a strange glint in them as he secretly thought, so the government really did manage to set up a small base. Although he already expected it, since it was simply impossible for humanity's armed troops to fall so quickly when most of the enemies were slow and unintelligent zombies, the warning bells rang in his head noisily. I don't think the person in charge of the place is unaware of the leader subclass. He thought with narrowed eyes as he gently tapped the wooden table with his finger. He had already discussed the matter with Lilith the night before, and she had made it clear to him that a existence could only obtain a subclass upon reaching the second order. However, there was one exception to this rule: those who met occult requirements. If it was in the past, as long as the government and the military gave him a good incentive and treatment, Bai Zimin might have been willing to work together with them. After all, the human race was in danger of being completely annihilated, and if he received the support of the military and the government, it might be much easier for him to reach Chongping district where his family was located. The problem was that Bai Zimin alone simply did not have the ability to reach his family on his own. Yanqing district had approximately 5 million people before the apocalypse, and because it was an ecological area, the forests were numerous. How was he alone to face millions of zombies and countless mutated and evolved beasts? Even if he was strong, it was clear to Bai Zimin that overconfidence would only kill him sooner rather than later. However, all thoughts of joining the government and the military disappeared 100% yesterday when he gained control of over 1,000 survivors and obtained the lower leader subclass. It was simply impossible for him to surrender such a large source of power, and Bai Zimin was very clear that if he joined the government, it would be impossible for him to keep his forces intact. Hand over the firearms, his treasures, rations, the survivors. These were all things that Bai Zimin could not afford to lose no matter what. However, there was a problem. He looked at Shang Guanbing Shuet, Chen He, and Wu Yuzhen before sighing secretly. He was already starting to feel a headache coming on. What do you all think about it? Bai Zimin inquired in a deep voice. This is a great thing. Chen He exclaimed in relief. If the Yanqing district government still remains on its feet, then it is highly likely that the rest of the country will have at least some kind of order established as well. Wu Yuzhen shook her head and while looking at her friend pointed out, he is just a mayor, Chen He. Besides, this man Bai Yang can only barely represent the Baekwan sub-district and not the entire Yanqing district. The central government didn't necessarily manage to hold its own. As everyone expressed their opinions and ideas on the broadcast heard, Shang Guanbing Shui had her head down, seemingly deep in thought. It was only after a long time that she finally looked at Bai Zimin and asked, "What do you think about it?" Bai Zimin, who had also been silent, looked at her and calmly responded, "Even if we want to reach Baekwan camp, we need to cross half a sub-district, so it is not something that can be accomplished in 1 or 2 days considering the current situation." Shang Guanbing Shui nodded and after thinking for a moment said quietly, "Besides, I would like to see the situation inside the camp before making a decision. I think it's not necessarily a good thing to join the government." Wu Yuzhen furrowed her eyebrows tightly and seemed to realize something as she said, "That's right. Who can guarantee that those at the higher UPS didn't get corrected after acquiring real power and strange skills? Considering the current situation in which China and probably the whole world finds itself, relying too much on old agencies might be the first step to fall." Hearing this, even Chen He frowned and fell under deep contemplation. None of the three were ordinary people. They had lived or had some kind of close contact with the government and military forces since they were young, so they knew well how high society worked. The higher up someone was, the higher they wanted to be and the less willing they were to take orders from another being. This was an irrefutable reality, and now that society had collapsed, why would they have to be guided by the old rules and norms then? Bai Zimin was silent and after a moment's consideration concluded, "Then we will infiltrate Camp Baekwan." We can decide after seeing the situation there. That's the best idea. Shang Guanbing Shui nodded and the rest also agreed. Soon, the three of them separated and began to perform different tasks. When only Bai Zimin was left inside the room, Lilith entered through the door in her lily form. Seeing him still deep in thought, she calmly asked, "Why do you still care about their opinion? Considering your current strength, even that woman Shang Guanbing Shui couldn't even survive 10 seconds in front of you." Bai Zimin looked at her and could not help but secretly sigh. Lilith really was the most incredible woman he had ever met, not for nothing she was a sixth-order existence after all. Even wearing a pair of black jeans and a white blouse, and even when her appearance was slightly above average, her innate charm was still terrifying. After appreciating the beauty in front of him for a few seconds, he closed his eyes and calmly replied, "Indeed, I could force them all. But that wouldn't make me a leader, I'd be a tyrant. You know? It's harder to be a good leader than a good tyrant." Lilith pointed and sat down next to him. "Maybe." Bai Zimin nodded, secretly savoring her natural fragrance. "But if I lie and force them now, in the future I won't be able to form my own faction with great powerhouses. Although I would love to move solo, to do that I need to be at the top end. Unfortunately, I am only at the bottom of the food pyramid. To help you, whatever it is, I'll probably need a lot of power." Lilith's beautiful eyes glittered curiously and she pursed her lips into a charming smile. "I see you've thought a lot further ahead than I thought. In fact, many things would be easier for you if you simply use pure power. But in the long run, your losses would be astronomical and you would probably even perish halfway through." Bai Zimin chuckled and walked towards the exit while thinking that even an elephant could not defeat several million ants united. After 2 days, different jobs were delegated to the survivors of the beginning village. Although not all were able to get a job and the vast majority still had to make do with the 3 bowls of gruel a day, none complained and happily ate what they were given. During the past 2 days, the new armed militia was also properly formed, totaling over 60 men armed with different types of firearms. Since Bai Zimin had no experience in the military environment and Chen he was born into a military family, he had to go to him to learn a bit. In the end, the 60 armed troops were divided into 3 groups of 20 men each with a main leader at the head being Shang Guanbing Shui, Chen He, and Wu Yujun. While rations were now plentiful, every grain of rice consumed was a grain of rice that was lost forever. Although some seeds had been planted in the surrounding fields, it would take time to see if they would germinate or not, and if they did not, it was necessary to know if this was the case in all the lands or only in some areas. There was still much to do and many things unknown about the soul record. During the 2 days in which Wu Yujun, Shang Guanbing Shui, Chen He, and the rest were in charge of delegating labors and training the armed militia, Bai Zimin was busy with other important matters. In the middle of the forest about 2 kilometers away from the beginning village. On the first day he took control of the village after killing the previous leaders. A few hours after he and the rest arrived from the workshop and blacksmith shop where he worked before the arrival of the soul record on Earth, Bai Zimin was sitting on the branch of a huge tree. In front of him, about 50 feet away, the apparently lifeless body of Yang Pei lay carelessly on the grass. Although the wind was blowing and some branches or dry leaves were falling on his face, he showed no signs of awakening. It had not yet been 24 hours since Bai Zimin forced Yang Pei to consume the fruit from the mutated plant, so until the exact moment arrived it was highly improbable that he would be able to wake up from the deep sleep he had fallen into. The fever had disappeared several hours ago, but even then it seemed that his body was getting used to something because, according to Lilith, the mana inside Yang Pei's body was unstable. According to her, he was probably just finishing digesting the effects of the fruit before finally opening his eyes again or bursting into a bloody mist. As to which of the 2 cases would happen, Bai Zimin was not sure, but just in case he decided to stay away from the village to avoid problems. Time passed and Bai Zimin remained in place without getting down from the tree, as from his position he had a wide view of the surroundings. That way, he could prevent himself from being surrounded by any kind of enemy and avoid surprise attacks. While it was true that his blood will skill seemed to activate when enemies appeared within 100 meters of him as the center, Bai Zemin did not know how the skill worked yet, so he did not dare to trust his life to it. Approximately 3 hours later, Bai Zemin slowly stood up on the thick branch he was sitting on and looked forward with an excited smile. This scum is waking up and it didn't explode? That means that plant is as I guessed, an incredible treasure. Lilith, floating a few meters away from him, smiled brightly and nodded as she heartily congratulated, "Congratulations, little Zeman. Now you will be able to become more powerful than you already are and probably take a great leap forward." Bai Zeman nodded and rubbed his hands together eagerly as he waited for a great performance from Yang Pei. Just in case, he had brought along a couple of grenades, as although he was confident in his strength, if that plant gave Yang Pei some strange power, he was not willing to take any risks and would simply explode him into pieces. Ugh! It hurts like hell. Unfortunately, the first thing that came out of Yang Pei's mouth was a groan followed by a loud curse. The only one of the 4 bosses alive looked at Bai Zeman from several meters away and his eyes turned blood red as he shouted, "Damn bastard! If my legs were healthy, I swear to God I would cut you into 1,000,000 pieces. But before that I must let you suffer hell on earth." The excited expression on Bai Zeman's face disappeared completely and his face turned black as the bottom of a pot. "What's that all about?" he muttered, dumbfounded. "Wasn't this little dog supposed to receive some strange power?" Lilith descended and stood beside him as she looked at the man who was still cursing relentlessly. After a moment of consideration, she pointed out, "Some plants give stats, some confer skills, some even awaken the latent power of skills we already possessed or are even capable of upgrading treasures. So?" Bai Zeman urged her to continue, feeling anxious like a small child. Lilith looked at him with a smile and reminded him of something he had overlooked, "So, unless that plant was focused on treasures, that Yang Pei guy probably won't be able to demonstrate the power he received since you broke his limbs." Bai Zeman was dumbfounded and looked at her as if he was looking at an otherworlder, which, ironically enough, she was. Lilith also looked at him silently, with a charming smile just as she always did. "Bastard!" It was only when Yang Pei's enraged roar thundered through the forest that Bai Zeman finally reacted. He looked at Yang Pei's squirming legs and sighed as he shook his head before leaping forward. He fell 2 meters away from where Yang Pei lay and looked at him coldly. Yang Pei, who a moment ago was roaring and shouting that he was going to cut him into 1,000,000 pieces, got scared and the yell that was about to come out of his mouth ended up getting stuck in the middle of his throat. He knew he was no match for the young man in front of him, but Yang Pei was used to being rampant and wild, so in the end, he ended up acting contrary to what his brain was telling him he should do if he wanted to have a slim hope of survival. "Really? I should have left you at least one leg unharmed." Bai Zeman shook his head and said words that scared the young evolver even more. Unfortunately, before he could say anything, Bai Zeman raised his foot high and then lowered it once more, but with all his might. Bang! "You have acquired the soul power of Yang Pei level 20. Yang Pei's head banged into pieces, splattering blood and flesh everywhere. However, Bai Zeman's foot not only pierced through the sturdy body of an evolutionary level 20 with apparent ease but continued further and made a small hole about 30 centimeters wide in the ground as well. Without Yang Pei's constant cursing, the forest became silent once again until Bai Zeman's voice rang out again. "Well, although I don't know what benefit this plant confers, I at least know that it is a treasure capable of boosting a person's strength." Lilith's seductive voice followed right behind, "That means you can now consume the fruit by yourself and wait for the results." Bai Zeman looked up at the blue sky for a few minutes, pondering what to do next as the cool breeze blew against his face. After nearly 10 minutes of consideration, he began to walk away as he muttered, "Let me make a few final preparations before finally consuming the fruit." After Bai Zeman left the forest and returned to the beginning village, the first thing he did was to look for Kong Lan and Cai Jing Ai. Inside the main village. Sitting on a couch, Bai Zimin looked at the two pretty women in front of him and asked in a deep voice, "So, what did you think of what I said to you just now?" The two girls looked at each other before standing up at the same time. Kong Lan was the first to kneel in front of him and as she looked down said with resolve and determination, "I am willing to become your loyal follower and follow you to the top or to the bottom of the abyss." Immediately, not even a second after Kong Lan finished speaking, Cai Jingii knelt on one knee just as knights did in the Middle Ages before the king, and solemnly swore. "Cai Jingii is willing to be your loyal follower. If you shine and are admired by countless, your radiance will enlighten me. If the darkness devours you and you are hated by the world, I will accompany you so that you will not feel lonely." Bai Zimin looked at the two young women kneeling in front of him and his lips curved slightly upward. After leaving the forest after checking that the effects of the fruit coming from the mutant plant were not evil and ending Yang Pei's life, Bai Zimin immediately returned and the first thing he did was to look for Kong Lan and Cai Jingii. While he could have gone to look for Fu Suifeng and Zhongde, the reasons why Bai Zimin chose Cai Jingii and Kong Lan was to ask them if they wished to be his loyal followers after explaining the effects of the skill were varied. However, he had two main reasons. 1. The first reason was that while Kong Lan could take the lives of numerous enemies after activating her poisonous cloud skill, Cai Jingii was fast enough to confuse the enemy and kill them quickly while protecting Kong Lan. In addition, Cai Jingii's speed was also perfect for leaving the range of Kong Lan's skill since it did not differentiate between allies and enemies. 2. The second reason was mainly based on Kong Lan. Although she was strong, her chosen path was pure magic, unlike Shang Guanbing Xuet. Therefore, her physical stats, while more powerful than the average person, were also not outstanding or high enough. Therefore, Bai Zimin wanted to give her, who was his only healer, a means of preserving her life in times of need. Aside from these two main reasons, there was a third. This third reason was that the two girls seemed more willing to kill in order to maintain their lives and dignity. Because after consuming the fruit of the mutant plant he would go into a coma in order for his body to adapt to the changes his soul would undergo with the intervention of the soul record, Bai Zimin urgently needed people he could trust 100% without fear of being stabbed in his sleep to protect him. While Bai Zimin trusted Kong Lan, Cai Jingii, Fu Suifeng, and Zhongde enough as he did not believe any of them were evil enough to bite the hand that saved their lives, made them grow, and even nurtured them, it was better to be forewarned. Therefore, Bai Zimin wanted to put a seal, something similar to a leash that would prevent this kind of problem and at the same time improve their confidence in each other. It was precisely because of this that he explained to the two girls the effects of the skill coming from his lower leader subclass. Seeing them accept without hesitation, Bai Zimin nodded in satisfaction as this meant that neither of them had intended to betray him at any point in time. From the beginning, none of them had even a distant thought of betraying him. After all, they were both grateful to Bai Zimin in many ways. He thought he had only given them power, but he had done much more than this. Bai Zimin had made the timid Cai Jingii more confident, made the lonely Kong Lan gain friends she could trust. He saved their lives on numerous occasions, pushed them to quickly get used to the changing world in order to survive. He gave them strength and still continued to help them relentlessly. He had done so much for them. Therefore, when he told them about the skill of his subclass, none of them hesitated and accepted immediately. Then let's finish this. He did not hesitate and immediately activated the skill attached to his subclass. Bai Zimin felt a slight pain in his soul as if someone had pricked him with a needle, but soon that pain disappeared and the body of the two kneeling women lit up with a bright light of a faint reddish color. Due to the activation of your subclass skill, these two women will never be able to betray you. The voice of Lilith, who was invisible and undetectable by all except him, sounded beside him. This is because a small fragment of your soul is linked to that of these people. It is also for this reason that those who become a loyal follower can use a small part of your overall power. Bai Zimin nodded imperceptibly and the light illuminating the two girls disappeared completely at the same time as a message flashed in his retina. You have chosen the unclassified existences Konglan and Cai Jingii as your loyal followers, two halves. The two girls looked at each other blankly and slowly stood up. This is all? Cai Jingii asked in confusion. Neither she nor Konglan felt any kind of change in their bodies or thought processes. They had expected something different, but everything was seemingly the same as before. That's all. Bai Zeman stood up from the couch and said in a serious voice, I will now begin to absorb a power coming from a mutant fruit, so I will be out for 24 hours. During that time I will need you to protect me. The two girls nodded with serious expressions as they clearly understood how grave the matter was. After all, with all the things he had done, it was only natural that some people were unhappy with Bai Zeman. As he walked to his room on the top floor of the villa, Bai Zeman ordered, during that time, if anyone is looking for me, just tell them that I am busy with something important, no need to explain any further. If anyone tries to break in, then just kill them. Yes. The two women looked at each other and nodded with determination. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Sitting on the edge of his bed inside his room, Bai Zeman took out a red fruit from the mutant plant very carefully. Because he had used one on Yang Pei earlier to confirm whether the fruit was edible or not, now that he was going to eat another one, he only left one remaining of the original three. Go and hurry back. Standing beside the bed, Lilith looked at him with a beautiful smile. Bai Zeman looked at her and couldn't help but laugh, ha ha ha. Lilith, why do you make it sound like I'm going to another world? Without waiting for a reply, he leaned back on the bed and casually threw the mutant fruit into his mouth. His face scrunched up and he couldn't help but curse inwardly. Unlike in fantasy novels or comic books where the divine fruits were incredibly sweet and tasty, the fruit he had just consumed was incredibly sour, so much so that eating lemon was only kid stuff in comparison. However, he had no time to complain as he immediately felt his body burning. It burned as if he had been thrown into a spring of boiling water. It was so bad that even before he could grunt in pain, his eyes rolled back in his head and passed out. Seeing his breathing slightly uneven but calm and his chest heaving gently, Lilith leaned forward. Her face rested only a couple of centimeters away from Bai Zeman's face. She could even feel his breath caressing her face softly as her black hair fell like a night veil down the sides, covering both of their faces from the outside. Her red eyes glittered like precious gems and she pursed her lips, millimeters from his. She whispered softly, hurry up and wake up, little Zeman. This big sister is curious to see what you get. Then, she took a step back and sat on the edge of the bed as she looked at him silently. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. A day passed quickly, and after the beginning of the second day since the fall of the previous 4 leaders, a great number of survivors had been given different jobs to do and the initial armed militia had finally formed properly. After 24 hours of silent agony, Bai Zeman's eyelashes moved imperceptibly. However, this small movement could not escape the strong and sharp senses of the higher existence present. Finally awake. Hearing the most beautiful voice of the most charming and dangerous woman he had ever met in his entire life, Bai Zeman smiled and opened his eyes slowly. Congratulations! You have learned second order active skill level 5 lightning movement. Bai Zeman blinked several times at the message flashing in green letters across his retina, and the smile that had formed on his face after hearing Lilith's charming voice widened. Noticing his face practically beaming with joy, Lilith couldn't help but find it cute and amusing at the same time. Seeing the excitement in your eyes, I guess I don't need to ask. Lilith smiled slightly and sat down next to him as she stretched her hand forward. Bai Zeman looked at her flawless hand and chuckled. If it was before, he might not understand her intention, but after more than half a month of living together and practically never separating, it was easy for him to know what she wanted. Without saying a word in return, he took her delicate hand in his clearly larger one. His movement was so gentle that he seemed afraid of hurting her, even though he knew such a thing was impossible. Soon, the description of the newly acquired skill flickered across both of their retinas. Lightning movement, second order active skill, level 5, this is a skill capable of increasing the user's movement speed and slightly utilizing the power of lightning. First activation, after consuming 40 stamina points, it increases agility by plus 70 points for 5 minutes. Second activation, consumes 5 stamina points to make a lightning clone that can use 10% of the user's overall power. In addition, it consumes 1 stamina point per second for each clone. Currently, a maximum of 3 clones can be created. Seeing how powerful the skill acquired after consuming the mutant fruit was, Bai Zimin had to restrain the urge to want to roar at the sky. 70 points of agility. That was the terrifying amount of boost this skill granted him, and for a total of 5 full minutes. Even with the consumption of 40 stamina points, it was nothing compared to the benefits. This skill had so many uses that Bai Zimin didn't know where to start. Fleeing, dodging, chasing, killing, helping teammates, etc. Simply too many uses to describe them all. Furthermore, the second activation of the lightning movement skill was even more powerful than the first activation depending on how one used it. Oh! Lilith also raised an eyebrow and pointed out, this skill is one of the most powerful skills that the Heavens Army's Archangel Gabriel possesses. Of course, his lightning movement is far more advanced than yours currently. Don't worry, there will come a time when he will eat the dust I left behind. Bai Zimin stood up and said confidently. Lilith held back the urge to laugh and said excitedly, that will be fun to see. But let me tell you just in case, but the archangels are almost all in the 7th order. Cough. Cough. Bai Zimin began coughing viciously and nearly choked to death. He could even feel his face getting hot with embarrassment. Due to the enthusiasm of the moment, he couldn't help but say words in a big way. Little did he expect that his own words would turn around to bite him so soon. I'd better get going. Bai Zimin wisely did not comment further on the matter and walked towards the door. Lots of work to do. Lilith shook her head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, and followed him as she calmly reminded him, the order and existence is in does not represent that they are more powerful. I think you already know that from how you were able to defeat beings way higher than you when you didn't even have your main class yet. Still. 7th order. Bai Zimin thought silently. That was even higher than Lilith. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. As Bai Zimin walked down the stairs, he heard a few voices and easily identified most of them. However, the content of the conversation caused his brow to furrow slightly. We already said yesterday that he is busy and can't attend to anyone. Cai Jing I's helpless voice rang out. Busy. This time it was Shang Guanbing Shui answering, and she was clearly a little upset. This is important. In fact, it could be said that he will benefit the most from all of this overall, but you're telling me he's busy. We're just saying what he told us to say in case anyone is looking for him. Kong Lan sighed. Before anyone else could say anything, Bai Zimin came into the room and looked at Shang Guanbing Shui before calmly asking, what's wrong? Seeing that even you, who is usually calm, is agitated like this, it must be something really important. Not only was Shang Guanbing Shui present, there was also Chen He, Wu Yujun, Fu Suifeng, Zhong Dai, and even Luo Cheng. They all seemed anxious about something, and had it not been for Cai Jing I and Kong Lan insisting on not letting anyone pass, they would have gone looking for him. Shang Guanbing Shui rolled her eyes and couldn't help but complain, where have you been? We've been looking for you since yesterday for a matter of grave importance. I'm sorry, but it was something really important. Bai Zimin apologized honestly and gestured for everyone to sit down. As a leader, he knew that disappearing for too long was not a good thing. Much less now that his position was just consolidating properly and was still not a 100% sure thing. However, circumstances had forced him. After all, the sooner he consumed the fruit, the sooner he could become more powerful. Let's forget about that and do what's really important here. Chen He exclaimed with a serious voice and a touch of excitement. He spread a map of the Rulan sub-district on the table before looking at Wu Yujun. Wu Yujun nodded slightly and stood up. Her graceful figure was shown at its best with the tight clothes she was wearing, and her expression together with her baby face was unbelievably charming. Bai Zimin looked at her for a few seconds before looking at the map, which was mostly green due to the large number of wooded areas in the surrounding region. After about a minute or two of staring completely focused at the map on the table, Wu Yujun pointed to a particular area and said confidently, "In the past, I came to this place with my grandfather. At that time a military camp was being built in the area, and because of his position in the government he personally inspected the task. It's been a few years since then, but I still remember the area vividly. I'm sure there should be some military equipment and weapons in this place," she concluded before looking at Bai Zimin with a smile shaping two beautiful dimples on her cheeks and left even Chen He stunned. Bai Zimin was dumbfounded at first, but then the joy made his blood boil furiously. A military camp. His heart was beating like a wild horse at the thought and possibility of acquiring the weapons of a military camp. Just by raiding a local police station, Ye Qigong and the other three had managed to arm several dozen men without a problem and obtain many supplies and resources. If what Wu Yujun said was true and there really was a military camp stationed there, then Bai Zimin could start moving in a southerly direction immediately. The whole process of meeting his family again would become a lot easier. It was only after hearing Wu Yujun's announcement that Bai Zimin finally understood the reason why even the generally cold Shangguan Bing Shui was so agitated. At the same time, he also came to understand why she said that in the end, the one who would benefit most from everything would be him. After all, if there really was an armed camp stationed in that place, many things would be easier for him, and, as a leader, it was natural to want his own power to grow and expand. Bai Zimin looked at the beautiful Wu Yujun and asked with a frown, "Although it's none of my business, but may I know who your grandfather is? I know you come from a prominent family, but to think that even your grandfather has a high enough rank to know confidential information and even be able to take his granddaughter to such a place." Wu Yujun smiled sweetly and answered in all honesty, "My grandfather is Wu Jianhong and my father is Wu Qiqian. You probably already heard about my grandfather, and since your family is resident of Chongping district, I assume you already heard his name too." Wu Jianhong. Bai Zimin muttered and his eyes grew wide. Your grandfather is the premier of China." When Wu Yujun nodded naturally, the place fell silent for a second before a series of gasps could be heard in unison. Except for Chen He and Shangguan Bing Shui, who already knew about Wu Yujun's family background, everyone in the room gasped as they stared at the woman in front of them. Even Bai Zimin himself was shocked for a moment. Although the world had changed, it was hard to shake off 20 years of living in a normal family. For him, the Premier of China was a supreme and absolute existence, but now, in front of his eyes, the beloved granddaughter of the second most powerful man in the whole country was looking at him with a charming smile. Besides, even if the world had changed, if Wu Yujun's family did not collapse and her grandfather continued on his feet, it was only a matter of time before they would rise to power again. But rather than feeling relieved and joyful, what Bai Zimin felt was a severe headache. For it was highly probable that in the future he would have to fight the entire old regime unless he was willing to surrender his armed power, something that was simply impossible. How could he casually surrender to all their efforts? Bai Zimin shook his head and looked at her curiously without letting his inner thoughts reveal themselves. "I see. Then it makes sense that you would know such information. Also, to think that your father is actually the mayor of Chongping district. You sure are something at." Wu Yujun shook her head and smiled bitterly. "To be honest, sometimes I wish I was born in a normal family. Besides, I hope you can continue to treat me the same way you've done so far and my family won't affect your way of thinking about me." Shangguan Bing Shui, Chen He, and the others inside the room looked at Bai Zimin waiting for his reaction, but he simply nodded slightly and said with a casual smile, "Of course. You don't need to worry about that. Although I'm surprised, that's all. With today's world, I don't think the past matters much considering that practically the entire society fell down." He. Wu Yujun smiled sweetly and her eyes curved into a crescent moon shape. She looked at him and asked somewhat curiously, "Bai Zimin, Do you have a girlfriend? Bai Zimin was taken by surprise and for a moment did not know what to say. Not only him, Shang Guanbing Shui opened her beautiful eyes and looked at her friend in shock. Yu Jun, you. Chen He also couldn't believe what he was hearing. What? Wu Yujun shrugged and said innocently, I'm not asking him to go out with me. I just asked out of curiosity, that's all. The corner of Chen He's mouth twitched a couple of times as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he shook his head and remained silent. Maybe Wu Yujun's act could fool everyone here, but he and Shang Guanbing Shui knew her too well after all. I don't currently have a girlfriend. Bai Zimin replied and closed his eyes before opening them again. Before anyone could say anything, he added, but you could say that I have a long-term contract with a woman to whom I owe a lot. Oh. Wu Yujun looked interested and narrowed her eyes. In fact, everyone looked curious and looked at him. They wanted to know what kind of person she was to make even in this world he would remember her like that. Even though he had been forced to do so many things to survive and had gone through so many hardships, there was still such a woman in his mind. You should know that there were actually dozens, if not hundreds of women of different ages who would be more than willing to become his woman, but Bai Zimin never gave any of them a second glance. In fact, since the beginning of the apocalypse he was never seen to be too close to any woman except for occasional conversations with Wu Yujun or small contacts with Shang Guanbing Shui. Invisible and away from everyone's sight, the woman who was the center of conversation watched and listened to everything with a bright smile that, fortunately or unfortunately, no one could see. A long-term contract, eh? I like how it sounds. Asterisk. After more than an hour of deliberation, the group finally made the decision to start moving in a southerly direction, as fortunately the armed camp was located in one of the forests about 150 kilometers away from where the beginning village was situated. This was a matter of utmost urgency, just as Shang Guanbing Shui had said earlier. Mainly due to the fact that they currently only had a little over 15,000 rounds of ammunition and the grenades did not even number 20. With such low ammunition and considering the low hit rate that people without military training could have against zombie heads, out of those 15,000 rounds of ammunition it was improbable that more than 1,000 zombies could be killed, and this was already a generous estimate. Bai Zimin also asked what had happened during the day he was away and learned that Shang Guanbing Shui had the brilliant idea to divide the entire village into 3 areas and 3 groups. The groups were as follows. Normal citizens, they lived in the worst housing in the outer ring of the village, so the security was also lower. It was composed of those who did not want to work or who simply did not have any useful ability or the courage to fight. Noble citizens, they lived in the middle area of the village. Their living conditions were considerably better than those of the normal citizens, as they were not only safer but also received better food. They were composed of those who did work and did not differentiate between doctor or animal keeper, as all professions were important nowadays. Royalty, they lived in the central area of the village. Their houses were the best and their living conditions were far superior to those of the 2 previous groups. The royalty consisted of those who actively fought on the front lines against zombies, evolved beasts, and any other enemy of the village. Because they were at the greatest risk, they could eat the best food and enjoy the best treatment. Unlike the first 2 groups, the royalty members were differentiated, as there were the militants and the main leaders as well as the top leader, who was currently Bai Zimin. This type of setup was incredibly simple and even rustic in a sense. However, the reason Bai Zimin openly praised Shang Guanbing Shui for thinking of such an idea was because since they only had a little over 1,000 survivors, such simplicity made the divisions extremely clear and everyone's work would be much easier. Furthermore, with this clear distinction, the survivors would slowly begin to realize that the world was no longer as it was before, and that if they wanted better treatment they should not expect help from anyone but themselves, since, unlike in the past, here there was no government to complain to. With the guidance of Wu Yujun, Bai Zimin visited the place where an important task was being carried out in order for him to advance and enhance his own personal power and that of his followers even further. A step behind the 2, Lilith in her human form followed them silently as she looked around calmly. In a large walled courtyard which was being protected by a total of 10 men armed with Type 79 submachine guns and 3 magazines of ammunition each, a group of survivors was huddled in different parts of the place working tirelessly. Leader Bai Xiaomin, one of the first militants to surrender before Bai Zimin and one of the few to survive, quickly advanced and bowed respectfully when he saw him appear in the courtyard. Because of her beauty, Wu Yujun received several stares, but she was already used to it, so she acted as if nothing. Besides, after 1 or 2 peeks, no one dared to continue looking for fear of losing their heads. Bai Zimin nodded towards Xiaomin and asked in a deep voice, "How is the work going?" Xiaomin also focused on him and hurriedly replied while pointing to the different spots in the courtyard, "Thanks to the new rules, all the survivors are very satisfied. No one dares to slack off because they know that if they lose this job they will go hungry again and their families will return to indigence again." Bai Zimin nodded silently and watched the scene with satisfaction. More than 200 survivors were surrounding different mutant beasts and taking care of their bodies without daring to be neglected. With one of the first order's evolved cat claws or a shadow tiger claw that Bai Zimin had killed before leaving the university, the survivors were tearing off the scales of the first order's Jiaolao snakes. Although it was difficult to do, with the evolved snakes dead, the survivors could put the hard, sharp claw between the small spaces between each scale and slowly pry it away from the flesh. Elsewhere, a group of survivors with expertise in tailoring was taking care of the different skins, such as the skin of the platinum ape, shadow tiger, gale cat, etc. Using metal pieces from the shell of one of the first order blazing beetles, they were carefully cutting the skin, and when the fur was completely removed from the body it was placed in large wooden bundles and tied with strings so that they were well stretched. In that way, the fur of the other beasts was slowly beginning to dry. "Looks good," Wu Yujun said cheerfully and looked at Bai Zimin with a cute smile. "Bai Zimin, follow me. I'll take you there." Bai Zimin looked at her smile and his mood seemed to improve a bit. After following her and walking several meters, he finally saw one of his main objectives for this visit. The 4-meter-tall and approximately 7-meter-long body of the reinforced iron boar lay lifeless in a large open field. Surrounding it were several survivors with bitter expressions. Seeing Bai Zimin and the 2 beauties approaching, a middle-aged man with several parts of his hair already white quickly advanced and bowed, "Leader Bai." The rest of the survivors surrounding the reinforced iron boar's body also bowed and quickly greeted. Bai Zimin nodded and looked at the middle-aged man. "Zheng Yang, I heard that you have problems with this boy." Zheng Yang smiled bitterly and nodded. He pointed at the reinforced iron boar Jabali as he said, "Leader Bai, this monster's armor is too tough. Even with the beast claws you gave us it is simply impossible to break through the defenses." Even with the Xianyuan sword, Bai Zimin had not been able to break through the defenses of the first order reinforced iron boar, so he was not too surprised to hear such a statement. In fact, if it wasn't for his terrifying strength and agility as well as the help of his blood berserker class, he could never have killed such a terrifying monster. "It's all right. Do you think you can handle it if I make a breakthrough?" Bai Zimin frowned slightly and asked. After all, it was impossible for him to stay too long here guarding the iron-reinforced boar. He still needed to expand southward and he couldn't afford to waste time at the beginning of the apocalypse, as it would kill him in the intermediate stages. Zheng Yang was silent for a moment and after careful reflection nodded, "I think it's possible if we remove some extra flesh." "Then let's do it like this." Bai Zimin nodded and waved his hand back. Wu Yujun, Lily, Zhang Dai, and the rest of the survivors quickly retreated, clearing the area around the giant monster. Bai Zimin took out a bottle of blazing beetle blood from his backpack and casually scattered it on the ground. Then, he concentrated fully, and under the astonished eyes of the survivors, the blood began to move slowly. Under his control, the gruesome-looking blood soon took solid form and turned into a long sharp ruby-colored sword that reflected the sun's rays. Bai Zimin's face turned slightly pale, as to form this sword he had consumed 150 mana points. If it were before, such an action would be difficult, but with his 300 plus mana points, it was not too much of a problem except for a slight faintness that disappeared as soon as it appeared. The sword floated on its own and fell gently into his right hand. Then, under the eyes filled with envy, admiration, and trepidation of the survivors, Bai Zeman activated the skill attached to the blazing ring in his right hand. The temperature in the place rose explosively and everyone was forced to take several steps back with fear-filled eyes as they looked at the crimson flame that had appeared out of nowhere and danced softly on the blood sword. Bai Zeman advanced and with a slight jump, his body flashed and appeared above the head of the reinforced iron boar. He observed carefully and after a moment's consideration pierced the center of the monster's forehead. Wu Yuzhen's eyes glittered with a hint of disbelief as she noticed how the hard metal armor that even with her skill she could not damage even a little bit, began to slowly give way. The metal armor that came in contact with the tip of the blood sword began to gradually melt as the burning flames did their work. After the tip of the sword pierced and reached the monster's flesh, Bai Zeman stopped trying to go deeper and began to walk upwards from the head slowly while dragging the blazing blood sword along with his movements. With great care and concentration, the metal armor began to slowly open under Bai Zeman's attention, forming a long line that stretched from the forehead to the back of the creature's body. As Bai Zeman finished the work, Wu Yuzhen looked at Lily and asked curiously, "May I know how long you have known Bai Zeman? I don't think you have only known each other for a couple of days." Lily looked at her as if surprised by the sudden question and asked back, "May I know what is the reason why you think so?" Wu Yuzhen smiled slightly and replied composedly, "Actually, I'm not the only person who noticed the strange closeness between the two of you. I mean, Bai Zeman obviously doesn't treat you like a maidservant or a normal assistant and he certainly cares about you and gives importance to your opinion when it comes to making important decisions. Who would do something like that unless they knew the other person well enough?" Lily simply smiled and didn't comment on the matter. In fact, there was nothing to comment on and everyone could think or assume whatever they pleased. Seeing that she did not want to continue with that conversation, Wu Yuzhen shook her head and did not insist. If it were someone else they might fear her as her position in the group was quite high, but as someone who was under the direct care of Bai Zeman, Wu Yuzhen's position was not something to be too afraid of and as long as she was given the necessary respect everything would be fine. After about 5 minutes, Bai Zeman wiped away the few beads of sweat that had formed on his face and took a deep breath as he cancelled his blood manipulation skill, which caused the crimson flame to evaporate the liquid blood and extinguish in mid-air. From the forehead to the back of the body on the beast's back, a large gash could be seen as if it wanted to split the body in two. The metal armor of the reinforced iron boar was incredibly tough and in order to cut through it Bai Zeman had to keep his blood manipulation skill active at all times, which had consumed a lot of his mana. After getting off the body, Bai Zeman walked towards Zheng Yang, the person in charge of this group, and ordered, "Start working now. The sooner you finish this the better. In fact, if possible I would like you to finish within 3 days at the most." 3 days. Zheng Yang frowned slightly but seeing the serious expression on his face he dared not refuse so he nodded hurriedly, "It will be difficult but we will give our best effort to finish as soon as possible." Bai Zeman nodded in satisfaction and gave him a light tap on the shoulder before pointing to a pile of Jiaolao snake scales that had been ripped off and said to Xiao Min, "When they are done with the scales have someone take them directly to my villa." "Understood." Xiao Min nodded and sent the trio off before returning to work. ******. On a road south of the beginning village, a convoy consisting of a modified bus, a Dongfeng truck, and 3 jeeps raised a cloud of dust as they moved forward without stopping. In the lead jeep, Bai Zeman sat in the passenger seat looking out the window. Trees whizzed by and he occasionally saw some zombies or broken corpses lying in the blood-stained grass. To reach Camp Baekwen they needed to travel a considerable distance, but before that Bai Zeman needed to clear the surroundings, collect as many resources as possible, find survivors, expand his power, and get the new armed militia used to battles slowly. Otherwise, should a battle break out between his group and the opposing camp, his troops would panic and flee at the first sound of gunfire. After driving carefully for about 2 hours and going through several obstacles blocking the road, Bai Zimin made a gesture and Luo Cheng stopped the vehicle at the roadside. Little Luo Ning was in the back seat chatting with Lilith happily. Feeling the vehicle stop the gear, she looked forward and asked curiously, "Big brother Bai, are we killing zombies?" "That's right." Bai Zimin nodded and got out of the vehicle without another word. "I can finally get stronger myself too." The little girl jumped out of the jeep and looked at the surroundings with bright eyes. Luo Cheng looked at his little sister not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he saw the emotion in her eyes. This little girl had acted cuddly with Bai Zimin all afternoon, and when she asked him if he could take her to hunt zombies he didn't even hesitate and agreed. In fact, Luo Cheng was grateful to him. After all, if Luo Ning could evolve and become stronger it would be a lot better for her in case something bad happened to him, who was her only family. In this new world, power and, unfortunately, courage were needed. Fighting from a distance was fine for Luo Cheng, but unless he had some kind of protection against the zombie infection, it was impossible for him to muster the courage to fight head-on. Chen He got out of another jeep and stood next to Bai Zimin as they looked toward the town 500 meters ahead. Behind, Fu Suifeng and Kong Lan were giving some orders to the 30 armed men they had brought along this time. As for the rest, they had stayed in the beginning village protecting the camp. Bai Zimin looked at Fu Suifeng and the latter nodded before charging towards the town at full speed. With him currently reaching level 19 and using his points in agility and stamina every time he leveled up as well as the sum of other stats gained, Fu Suifeng was currently 5 times faster than a normal person who had not been nurtured by soul power. In a short time he arrived at the entrance of the small town and began to shoot noisily into the sky. The zombies in the area were attracted by the strong soul power emanating from him as well as the sound of gunfire and began to stagger in his direction. In a short time more than 1,000 zombies gathered with the intention of surrounding him, and after killing several of them Fu Suifeng was forced to retreat or else even he would die pathetically. The newly recruited militants sucked in a breath of cold air as they saw the wave of 1,000 zombies advancing towards them. 30 untrained armed men against over 1,000 zombies. They were naturally scared and everyone couldn't help but take a step back. Just then, Bai Zimin's voice resounded everywhere, "If any of you run away, your right as a noble citizen will be revoked immediately. Furthermore, if any of you dare to disobey my orders or those of your immediate leader you will be forbidden the opportunity to obtain any other jobs and will have to settle for relief rations for the rest of your lives." At such a threat, the militants turned pale and did not dare to take another step. What a joke! Back to those days of suffering and hunger? No thanks. None of them were willing to lose the life they had just obtained. Bai Zimin realized that although his words were somewhat effective, the hands of the armed men were trembling lightly as they gripped their guns tightly. At this rate, it was only a matter of time before they would all start fleeing when the 1,000+ zombies got too close, or they would simply start wasting precious ammunition. "Chen He, you watch them." Bai Zimin ordered and looked at Fu Suifeng and Kong Lan before saying, "You two come with me." Without waiting for a reply, he rushed forward like a whirlwind. "Chen He, you watch them." Bai Zimin ordered and looked at Fu Suifeng and Kong Lan before saying, "You two come with me." Without waiting for a reply, he rushed forward like a whirlwind. Before the newly formed armed troops could react to what was happening, Bai Zimin had already crossed a distance of 300 meters in the blink of an eye. His body flickered like a flash of lightning, and under everyone's disbelieving gaze the head of a dozen zombies shot into the sky along with a torrent of blood. "Strong!" Fu Suifeng exclaimed in shock. Although he was already infinitely close to level 20, but even he was unable to discern Bai Zimin's movements distinctly before several zombies were decapitated. With 201 agility points, Bai Zimin was simply a monster who was 20 times faster than a normal person in good physical condition before the arrival of the soul record on Earth. Although Fu Suifeng was fast, there was still a great distance between him and Bai Zimin. Kong Lan's beautiful eyes flashed with a hint of surprise and admiration as her idolatry towards him increased exponentially. No matter how many times she saw him, she never ceased to be amazed by the power of her leader. The two looked at each other and quickly charged forward to join the fray. Although not as monstrous as Bai Zimin, Fu Suifeng used a meter-long claw from one of the first-order Gale cats to claim the lives of his enemies. As for Kong Lan, she could not use her poisonous cloud skill against the zombies as it, unfortunately, had no effect. Therefore, very carefully to avoid being scratched, she stood on the edge without being surrounded and casually decapitated the nearby zombies. As for the other militants, none of them managed to see anything before the zombies' heads flew off. In just a matter of 5 minutes, more than 500 zombies had been decapitated. Of these 500, most had naturally been killed by Bai Zimin, since he was the only one with a treasure capable of protecting his body almost completely from infection. But even then he needed some restraint. Blood ran like a river along the length and breadth of the road as headless corpses piled up close to each other. The zombies in the back even stumbled over the corpses of their dead comrades, becoming easy soul power for the 3 evolved ones who slaughtered them mercilessly. "You two, go back." After killing another 100 zombies, Bai Zimin called Fu Suifeng and Kong Lan to retreat. The duo did not hesitate and quickly retreated. Fu Suifeng was starting to get exhausted because even though less than 10 minutes had passed, the amount of stamina consumed had been especially high, since although the zombies were only level 5 at the moment, the danger they represented was still present in all its splendor. As for Kong Lan, her stamina was relatively low, so her chest was constantly rising and falling. Her light clothing had clung onto her body, which was gradually becoming more and more charming as a result of the sweat, giving her a somewhat seductive but at the same time dangerous vibe due to the blood stains that had inevitably reached her. As the two safely retreated, Bai Zimin decapitated another 20 zombies before backing away at full speed, appearing next to Chen He again in an instant. As he raptly glanced at the 30 armed men, Bai Zimin noticed how everyone's eyes were burning as they stared at him in naked admiration. "Fuck!" A militant whispered and tightened his grip on his gun as his whole body trembled uncontrollably. In fact, all the militants were trembling as they clutched their firearms. However, unlike before, this time it was not out of fear of the zombies but because of the excitement bubbling in their veins and the adrenaline coursing through the bloodstream of each of them. Such ghostly speed! Such an ability to take on an army of zombies by himself! Such strength and such an aura brimming with confidence! If before they had joined the armed troops to feel safer and to live better lives, now they were also doing it out of admiration for the young men in front of them. With such leaders, what was there to fear? Bai Zimin nodded, secretly satisfied with the result as he saw the morale of the armed troops soaring. In a battle, morale played an extremely important role. It was precisely for this reason that he entered the wave of zombies. To make a show of overwhelming power and let everyone see that there was nothing to fear. The remaining 400 or so zombies approached slowly but surely. Their white eyes and deformed faces were incredibly terrifying, but seeing the firm back of the leader in front, no soldier feared. As the zombies reached 100 meters range, Bai Zimin easily noticed how panic threatened to return to the militant's eyes and knew that temporarily it was the best thing he could do. "Fire at will!" Bai Zimin ordered loudly and casually took aim with his Desert Eagle before pulling the trigger. 100 meters ahead, a zombie fell noisily backwards, never to get up again. "Fire!" Chen He shouted, followed by Fu Suifeng. The militants raised their guns and shouted to shake off the dread they felt as they unleashed a storm of bullets uncontrollably on the enemies. Type 54 pistols, Type 79 submachine gun, Type 85 sniper, all kinds of old firearms were fired by the 30 armed men, and hundreds of bullets disappeared with every passing second. Among the wave of 400 zombies, some were shot in the abdomen, chest, heart, limbs, but they continued to advance without fear and without any sign of pain. They were creatures that, unless their brains failed to function, never stopped, and even those who lost mobility after being hit by some shots that damaged the bones of their legs made an effort to crawl before being crushed by those who came behind. Occasionally there were some zombies who were shot in the head and died, but it was simply impossible for only 30 untrained men to stop 400 monsters without fear of pain. Therefore, when a zombie fell, another one behind would advance and take its place, this gave the illusion of an inexhaustible troop that chilled everyone's blood. By Zeman and Chen He never missed a shot. Within a distance as short as 100 meters, Bai Zeman's special forces soldier skill and Chen He's sniper skill demonstrated their power to the fullest. Bang! Bai Zeman aimed and fired, killing a zombie. Without even a second's delay, he took aim again and another zombie's head exploded a split second later. Seeing the ease with which he aimed and fired without even securing the target, Chen He was speechless. This was the first time he had seen Bai Zeman use firearms in such a way, so he was naturally surprised. This man is really scary. Chen He thought silently as he killed zombies without a break except for changing the magazine of his gun. Faced with the endless wave of bullets, the zombies were slowly beginning to fall. However, it was simply impossible for 30 inexperienced people to annihilate more than 400 enemies who felt no pain and did not fear death when the distance separating them was only about 100 meters. Cease fire. Retreat 100 meters. Bai Zeman commanded deeply as the zombies approached 50 meters in front of them. The militants turned pale as a sheet when they saw for the first time in a long time so many zombies from such a close distance. Upon receiving Bai Zeman's direct order, those who could barely contain the urge to flee as they remembered the consequences immediately turned around and began to run in disorderly fashion toward the second line of defense marked in advance. Seeing how disorderly the retreat was, Bai Zeman sighed secretly and also retreated after making sure that all the men had reached a safe point. On my signal! Bai Zeman shouted and while looking behind him ordered, fire in bursts. Don't leave the trigger pulled like idiots and aim for the head. As the now just over 200 zombies approached, Bai Zeman ordered and the militants began to shoot in bursts. This caused the zombie kill rate to drop, but the accuracy increased dramatically as the vibration of the guns was far less. The ammunition savings also became noticeable and gradually the zombies began to fall. After retreating a total of 200 meters more than the initial 100 meters, the group led by Bai Zeman had consumed 70% of the ammunition they had brought for this assault. Cease fire! Bai Zeman shouted again as the number of zombies amounted to just over 60 and the militants gradually stopped firing. The fearful look in everyone's eyes had long since been nowhere to be seen, and as they looked at the less than 100 zombies approaching at a snail's pace, a bit of self-confidence began to be born naturally. This confidence came from the victory they had built together with their own hands. Luo Ning, are you sure you're all right? Bai Zeman approached the girl standing next to Lilith and asked carefully. It's okay, big brother Bai. Luo Ning nodded with determination and looked at the zombies more than 100 meters away without fear. Then, she looked at Bai Zeman and smiled in a cute manner as she said, besides, little Ning knows that you will protect her. Little girl, you. Bai Zeman didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the confidence this little girl had in him, even though he had barely known her for 3 days. What the hell, man? After all, you can act like that too. Chen He sighed secretly and a smile formed on his face as he watched the little interaction between the two. Bai Zeman took off his full coat and helped Luo Ning equip it. The treasure glowed and adjusted to the girl's stature automatically, showing just how powerful the soul record really was. With all of her natural stats gaining a +5 boost, the 9-year-old girl had no problem lifting Bai Zeman's Xianyuan sword and slashed a couple of times with relative ease. Follow me and don't be afraid. Bai Zeman took the girl's hand and advanced to meet the zombies slowly. As he saw them walking away, Luo Cheng opened his mouth to say something but in the end, shook his head and sighed. His eyes filled with worry stared at the back of his only family as he silently prayed for her safety. Don't worry. Kong Lan stepped closer and pointed out the undeniable truth, there's no way a few level 5 zombies can hurt someone he wishes to protect. Although I have my differences with him, I must say that at least he's a man who keeps his word and so far hasn't tried to bite off more than he can handle. Chen He reached over and lightly patted him on the shoulder. The two's words calmed Luo Cheng a little, but it was simply impossible for the worry to disappear completely. However, soon all that worry disappeared almost 100% within seconds when he witnessed the scene before him. Bai Zimin waited for the zombies to approach, and as he felt the small hand he held squeezing tightly with his own, he looked at the girl beside him. You stay behind me, I'll take care of those zombies first and then you can level up just by giving the final hit. Okay. MMH. Luoning nodded with bright eyes and her eyebrows curved like a crescent moon. When the zombies were 20 meters away, Bai Zimin seemed to disappear from his previous position and the ground under his feet cracked slightly due to the strength of his legs. Bang! 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 Luoning could not follow his movements, but she could hear the constant bangs, and for each bang, a zombie fell to the ground with its 4 broken limbs. Of course, each bang she heard was actually at least 4 explosions, but due to Bai Zimin's speed, the time between each one wasn't too long, so they seemed like one. Although he had lost his full coat momentarily, with one hand covered by his piercing glove and with his feet protected by the velocity boots, Bai Zimin was not afraid of zombies. Besides, with his overwhelmingly superior agility compared to the slow zombies, there was no way he would be in danger unless he was surrounded on all sides. After a minute, the 70 or so zombies lay on the ground growling furiously. However, although their appearances were still as horrifying as before, the danger they posed had practically dropped to the lowest possible level. Luoning carefully approached under Bai Zimin's guidance and noticed how each zombie had the bones of both arms and legs completely destroyed beyond recognition. The girl's face turned pale at the bloody scene, but she gritted her teeth and endured. Although she was a child, she was actually not as naive as she looked. Luoning was aware that the world she knew would never return. Precisely because of this she desperately wanted strength not only for herself, but also to protect her loved ones. Just take 3 small steps forward and cut off the head. You don't need to get any closer than that. Bai Zimin pointed at the first zombie and instructed. Following his words, Luoning took 3 small steps forward and raised the Xianyuan sword high into the sky before slashing downwards as a faint battle cry came out of her mouth. With a blade over a meter in length, the sword's edge easily severed the zombie's head. Although it failed to hit the neck, the brain turned to mush and the life of the human who failed to adapt to the world's mana was finally over. You have acquired the soul power of normal zombie level 5. Stamina plus 3. As time passed, the level of the zombies also slowly ascended. At the beginning of the apocalypse, most of the zombies were level 2 or level 3, while level 4 zombies were relatively rarer. However, now all of these zombies were level 4 or level 5. This meant that mankind had to hurry up and become stronger if they did not want to be devoured by the other beings wandering the earth. In the past, Bai Zimin had once asked Lilith about zombies. What kind of path did they follow? How did they evolve? Her answer was very simple but extremely clear and without leaving any misunderstanding: zombies evolve by devouring other living beings. But they can also absorb mana from the world. The problem was that when evolving by forcibly absorbing mana from the world, the evolution could not be chosen by oneself, just as when absorbing soul power from another existence. This meant that the evolution was almost 100% of the time countless instances weaker, and a second-order existence that had evolved incorrectly did not necessarily possess the power of a true first-order existence. It was a similar case to the first-order blood-sucking bee that Bai Zimin had killed after setting fire to the mutant forest. Due to its bad evolution after absorbing the mana that the mana embryo expelled, the blood-sucking bee had lost all mobility except for its wings due to its disproportionate body. However, this did not overshadow the fact that the zombies evolved relentlessly, which was incredibly frightening considering they were creatures that never slept and possessed seemingly infinite stamina. While the zombies and other creatures were evolving, most humans were hiding in some corner, and only the vast minority actually had the courage to come out and fight. Bai Zimin noticed that the girl's hands were trembling slightly as she gripped the sword with all her heart. He walked over and calmed her down, praising her for her good work. See, this is your skill. He pointed to the skill scroll that had fallen next to the slain zombie's body. My skill. Luoning followed his glance and her eyes shone. The girl seemed to forget her fears as she clutched Bai Zimin's shirt tightly and said cheerfully, "That's my skill?" Just like Big Brother Bai, I can also have a cool skill. Bai Zimin chuckled and nodded, that's right. It's yours. Let me pick it up for you. Hurry up, Big Brother. Hurry up. The little girl jumped like a rabbit all over the place as she pushed him forward. She still didn't dare to pick up something that was so close to the zombie's bloodied and messed up body after all. After picking up the scroll under Luo Ning's anxious eyes, the contents of the skill flashed in his retina. Summon Shadow Cat, First Order Active Skill, Level 2, spend 5 mana points to summon a Shadow Cat and consume 2 mana points for every 5 seconds. The Shadow Cat can blend in and camouflage itself with the darkness to become almost undetectable to the enemy's eyes, making it a perfect beast for surprise attacks. The skill is currently limited to one Shadow Cat. Bai Zimin raised an eyebrow and handed the skill to the little girl. Little Luoning's eyes shone with joy, and under Bai Zimin's guidance, the white scroll with dark speckles turned into particles of light that soon disappeared inside her body. Luoning, let's continue to raise your level to increase your mana as much as possible, and later we can see what your skill can do. Bai Zimin gently ruffled her hair and the girl nodded excitedly before dashing forward like a little tigress, decapitating zombie after zombie. In fact, Luoning was so happy that she ignored the pool of blood that had formed around her and seemed unaware that her Minnie and Mickey cartoon boots had been dyed red. Because she had received Bai Zimin's help, Luoning only rose to level 1 after killing 3 levels 5 zombies, which was noticeably lower than Bai Zimin. At that time he had directly risen to level 1 after killing the level 5 Big B. This meant that due to his assistance, Luoning was receiving about 1/3 of the soul power she could have gained if she had killed the zombies by herself. 7 more zombies took her to level 2. 15 more zombies took her directly to level 3. Luoning needed to decapitate 31 zombies of level 5 more to finally reach level 4. Under Bai Zimin's guidance, the 8 status points she had gained were used to boost her mana stat only, as her skill consumed large amounts of mana to work. With only about 20 zombies remaining, he and she knew that it was impossible to gain enough soul power to level up to level 5, so Bai Zimin decided to do something else. When Bai Zimin led Luoning back to where the troops were stationed, the girl ran to Luo Cheng to tell him the news. As for Bai Zimin himself, he looked at the militants and said in a deep voice, "Now I am giving you the opportunity to evolve almost without risk." Everyone looked at him carefully and he pointed at the zombies in the distance as he said, "Approximately 20 zombies were disabled by me, so that means a total of 7 people can go up 1 level and gain status points to become stronger. Are any of you interested? Let me warn you in advance, those who step forward will have to fight with swords and blades without relying on firearms frequently from this day forward." The 30 armed men looked each other in the eye. Most hesitated but in the end did not want to move forward. Fighting from long range was fine, but risking to die in a melee battle was still hard to accept. Although they were ashamed as they looked at the 9-year-old girl who had dared to fight, shame could not overcome the fear of death. However, there were several brave ones who stepped forward without hesitation. Bai Zimin looked at the 12 men who stood out from the rest and nodded in satisfaction as he silently thought, after all, these people went through many hardships. In 30 of them more than a third have the determination to fight, while among hundreds of well-fed and protected students only a few dared. Since we are currently short of zombies, only 7 of you will be able to level up. But don't worry. You will all be raised by me and turned into an elite troop. Bai Zimin promised honestly and saw the eyes of the 12 men glitter with fervor as they looked at him, Chen He, Fu Suifeng, and Kong Lan. They all had seen the power that each of them had, and those who were hot-blooded naturally hoped that they could acquire similar strength. Many present had lost their families during the course of the apocalypse and hated zombies and mutated beasts to the bone marrow. Now that someone had given them a chance for revenge, these men were naturally more than grateful and gladly stepped forward. Blades, iron pipes, wooden sticks, even with the butt of the gun they had, 7 of the 12 men who had stood out advanced, and after making sure that the only remaining danger in the zombies was their teeth, they began to bash their heads into a bloody mess. Once, twice, 3 times. After killing 3 levels 5 zombies each, all 7 men received the same message in their retinas. You have leveled up to level 1. You have acquired 2 status points to distribute freely. A few meters away, Bai Zimin smiled slightly. Little by little, an elite troop was forming under his flag, and there would come a time in the future when just hearing its name would be enough to terrify any being. After wiping out the 1,000+ zombies, the troop of 30 armed men led by Bai Zimin made its way into the small town. As the engine of the convoy entered the streets of the village, some straggling zombies that had remained inside the town began to move toward them while growling in a threatening manner. Chen He, Fu Suifeng, and Kong Lan jumped out of the vehicles they were riding in and charged forward separately in search of remaining zombies. In a matter of seconds the approaching zombies were decapitated with ease. Inside the jeep leading the way, Bai Zimin was sitting in the passenger seat with Luoning sitting comfortably on his lap. "All right, Luoning. Can you see that zombie? Right inside that house over there." Bai Zimin looked out the window of the jeep and pointed at a particular zombie that was stuck inside a house and could not move as some heavy objects were obstructing the passage. The girl looked to where he pointed and faintly noticed the zombie's head through the broken glass of the window. "Big brother, I see it." "Good." Bai Zimin nodded, and as he patted her head he urged, "Let's see what your skill can do then." Luoning's eyes flashed happily. She had been waiting for Bai Zimin to ask her to use her skill since she was also curious, so she didn't even hesitate and opened her palm while pointing forward. From the ground outside the jeep the shadows seemed to twist and soon a strange creature appeared. As Luoning jumped up excitedly and clapped her hands, Bai Zimin raised an eyebrow as he inspected the strange monster. Although it indeed looked like a cat, it was actually not a normal cat like the pets people had before the apocalypse. This cat was the size of a Siberian dog, its body was completely black as night while its eyes were as yellow as the sun. "Go!" Luoning pointed at the zombie and the shadow cat's eyes flashed before charging forward without thinking. The shadow cat's speed was very fast, about 4 times faster than a normal person. However, what surprised Bai Zimin and everyone watching most was that when the shadow cat jumped through the window and its body touched the shadows, it seemed to have disappeared as if by magic. "Where is it?" "Disappeared." Chen He was dumbfounded and couldn't help but look everywhere looking for the creature summoned by Luoning. "No. It's still right in front of us." Bai Zimin narrowed his eyes and just barely, ever so slightly, he could see how the shadows seemed to have a life of their own as they moved towards the zombie. Swoosh! The zombie didn't even have time to growl as the shadow of its own body suddenly distorted and the shadow cat jumped as it slashed with its claw horizontally. The zombie's head flew through the air and the lifeless body soon collapsed on the ground. "What the hell? Strong!" Fu Suifeng, Kong Lan, and Chen He were dumbfounded. The power of that summoned creature was truly horrifying. Luo Cheng looked at his little sister with wide eyes. Not only was he shocked that such power came from her, he was also incredibly happy. Now she would undoubtedly have a better chance of living and her safety would be much higher even if something happened to him. He. "Big brother Bai, how do you like my cat?" Luoning laughed merrily and cancelled her skill because the consumption was really high for the current her. In order to make full use of her skill, she needed to constantly level up. "Very strong. Little Ning, from now on you are an evolved person just like me." Bai Zimin ruffled her hair happily while secretly being surprised. Were the summons that strong? Bai Zimin wasn't sure before since Yang Pei's summons had been casually slapped to death by him. However, after seeing Luoning's shadow cat power he had to rethink that thought. After about 30 minutes, the entire town was inspected. House by house and every corner, everything was carefully explored without leaving even a single loophole. Several zombies were locked inside some houses and were taken care of by the armed troops with relative ease. In addition, inside some cellars and some houses with iron doors were found some survivors who were starving after not having eaten anything for more than half a month. 2 hours later. Sitting in the living room of a small villa inside the town, Bai Zemin listened carefully to Lilith's report in her human form. A total of 364 survivors were found inside the town. In addition, several rations were also found in some stores and inside some houses. The total ration equivalent is approximately 2 to 300 kilos of food plus water and other beverages. There were also some packs of cigarettes and. While listening to her melodious voice, Bai Zemin could not help but silently admire her. Dressed in a small police uniform that accentuated the curves of her body, Lilith looked like a brave warrior, which was a new sight for him. That's all. She lifted her face from the sheet of documents the little leaders of the different units had handed her and smiled sweetly towards him. Bai Zemin smiled back and thank you for the help, Lily. Although they were currently alone inside the room, it was best to be careful, so he referred to her by her false name instead of the real one. It's a pleasure to be of assistance to you. She replied and licked her lips playfully while looking at a certain part of his body. Before Bai Zemin could have any kind of reaction and respond to her, the door of the living room was softly opened. An armed man belonging to Bai Zemin's troops entered along with a rather emaciated woman whose skin had begun to turn somewhat yellow due to the lack of light for so long, as well as illnesses from not being able to access clean water and the starvation she had experienced. Leader Bai, Miss Lily. The militant bowed respectfully to both of them. Bai Zemin nodded and looked at the woman curiously. What is going on? This woman secured with her life that she has important information that might interest you, leader. The militant responded in a serious voice before looking at the woman and urging, this is our leader. You can tell him whatever you have to say. The woman hesitated. She looked at Bai Zemin for several seconds before asking somewhat fearfully, Hello, leader Bai. My name is Mu Yang. May I ask how is the world now? What's happening with the government and the army? She, like the rest of the survivors found in the village, had been locked inside her house and had not dared to stick her head out of the window since the first sign of chaos when the message from the soul record flashed in her retina. All of Bai Zemin's troops were wearing police uniforms that had been acquired from the police station near the beginning village before. Therefore, Mu Yang probably assumed that they were part of the government. Bai Zemin looked at the woman before him for a moment. In his head, he was thinking of all kinds of important information that this woman named Mu Yang might have, but even after careful thought, he did not manage to come up with a clear answer. It was hard for him to understand how a person who had not left her home could have important information. Still, he decided to be honest. Bai Zemin sat with his back completely straight and said in a deep voice. The central government has not contacted anyone, nor have they sent signals of any kind. The country's military forces probably collapsed or are in a big trouble, since even after more than half a month there is still no trace of them either. The sooner you accept that the old society no longer exists, the better it will be for you, as many things will be simpler that way. Mu Yang's face changed slightly and her eyes quivered with fear. Although deep in her heart she had expected something like this to happen from the moment that strange message appeared in her retina and the zombies began to devour the humans, the realization was still cruel. So you all, Mu. Yang looked at the police uniform of the armed man who had led her here and then hesitantly looked at the female police uniform Lilith was wearing before looking at Bai Zemin cautiously. Bai Zemin nodded and confirmed his suspicions. We are a group of survivors who are facing the zombies and mutated and evolved beasts. Although in our group there are also members of the government and military troops. The reason why Bai Zemin said those last words was because although he was strong, it was natural for people who did not know him to trust someone with status and from a leading family. In any case, when Mu Yang fully understood the new world, she would realize on her own that such things were no longer of importance. Evolved beasts? Mutated beasts? Mu Yang's eyes widened in shock. She had only seen normal zombies. As for mutated or evolved beasts, she knew nothing about it. However, the words of the young man in front of her made her even more confident of what she had seen. Due to the mana of the world, the animals mutated and gained terrifying strength and speed. Some of them managed to evolve into something completely new and gained the ability to use supernatural skills just like me. After saying those words, Bai Zeman made a small cut on his finger and activated his blood manipulation skill. Under the surprised gaze of the survivor, small strands of blood floated in the air and wrapped into a small red sphere. Swoosh! Under Bai Zeman's control, the liquid blood hardened to terrifying levels and turned into a bullet that shot towards one of the walls. Bang! My God! The female survivor took a frightened step back as she saw that the concrete wall had been pierced by the blood of a human being. Such a thing was simply unheard of. Her look at Bai Zeman changed completely, and even the militant's eyes now had another small notch of respect in them. Only now he realized that earlier, Bai Zeman had not gone all out. Bai Zeman looked at the woman and said in a deep voice, "Mu Yang Yang, as you just saw, the world has changed. In our group we have strict rules as food, safest places, etc., are too valuable nowadays. Depending on how important that information you have is, I may let you enjoy the treatment of a noble citizen under my rule. Even a royalty is not impossible." Mu Yang Yang might not know what a royalty or a noble citizen was, but seeing the militant's envious eyes when the word royalty was named, she understood that it was definitely a good thing. In the end, she gritted her teeth and nodded, "Okay, I'll tell you." It turns out that when the apocalypse broke out, Mu Yang Yang had managed to survive because she had reacted at the first moment and sought refuge in her home. Because her house had a metal door and the windows had steel bars, the zombies had not been able to reach her. The problem was that after 3 days, Mu Yang Yang had exhausted all the rations she had in her house, so that's when the real hell began for her. The days of starvation were unbearable. Her stomach roared with hunger and ached as if thousands of needles were constantly pricking her. Mu Yang Yang rolled around on the ground for a total of 7 days straight without eating anything, and the hunger was driving her crazy. So when the 10th day of the apocalypse came, under the effects of hunger, she decided to do what many other survivors had decided to do in desperate times. Go out in search of food. For her, it no longer mattered if she ended up being eaten by the zombies. Hunger was simply driving her completely insane. However, just when Mu Yang Yang had consumed a great deal of energy as well as determination to stand up and walk towards the door, she heard something from outside that made her stop her movements completely. Mu Yang Yang trembled with fear, and had it not been for the militant beside him he would have fallen to the ground. Bai Zeman told her to sit down, and only then she continued. That sound was very strange. It was like a human's laughter, but it was definitely not something a human being could make. Mu Yang Yang explained in terror, "As a precaution, I decided to look outside through the small porthole in the door. That's when I saw that little green monster." Bai Zeman narrowed his eyes, and upon seeing the slight change in Lilith's expression his face became serious. He looked at the militant and ordered him to retreat. Moreover, he also told him that if a word of this leaked out his head would fly up in the air. After the gunman left in fright, Bai Zeman looked at the surviving woman who was trembling scared, and urged in a deep voice, "Continue. That little green monster was ugly, just like the goblins that appear in fantasy stories." Mu Yang Yang exclaimed in a high-pitched voice, "Its mouth was incredibly big just like its nose, long and sharp teeth, its size didn't even reach a meter in height, and its ears were long and pointed while its eyes were golden like gold. It was definitely a goblin like the one in fairy tales. That must be a new age monster." Lilith's voice rang in his head, and Bai Zeman looked at her with questioning eyes. She explained, "Mana is an energy that no one has managed to fully comprehend. In the different worlds that the soul record visits, it is normal for some never-before-seen species to start appearing on Earth due to the influence of mana on the different species. Monsters that simply mutate or evolve are considered original monsters, in other words, those that already existed in this world before. As for the new species that are born under the influence of the soul record and mana, these are called New Age monsters. These monsters are far more dangerous than the original monsters in the initial and intermediate stages of each world." Bai Zeman's breathing stalled slightly as Lilith's words reached him, and for a moment it seemed as if his brain had stopped working. If due to mana and the soul record new life forms could form over time, didn't this mean that the more time passed not only would zombies and animals mutate and evolve even more, but also other unknown creatures even more powerful would appear? So far, Bai Zeman had encountered mutated and evolved insects such as the great fast mantis and the first order blazing beetle. He had also fought dogs, cats, snakes, tigers, and other mutated and evolved animals. However, for better or worse, these monsters were creatures that, while they had become infinitely more powerful than in the past, some of their weaknesses were still present. For example, during his battle to the death against the first order blazing beetle, Bai Zeman knew that the beetles could not turn their bodies and he took advantage of that weakness to kill it. But if other unknown beings appeared, this small advantage of knowledge about enemy biology would no longer be present in most cases. Bai Zeman took a deep breath and looked at Mu Yang Yang with sharp eyes. Are you sure about what you just said? Mu Yang Yang felt a heavy aura hovering over her and with a pale face nodded repeatedly as she stammered, I swear. It really was a small monster like a goblin. Besides, this goblin even took some survivors alive to the south. I saw the whole scene. I see. Bai Zeman nodded and his expression returned to indifference. The information you just provided is of utmost importance to me. I will arrange for you to be granted a villa in the center of the camp and you will be allowed to enjoy the privileges of a low-level royalty. Someone will explain the rules and benefits of your new position to you soon. Thank you. Thank you. Mu Yang Yang stood up and bowed as tears of pain, suffering, and joy spilled down her cheeks. While she didn't know what was a royalty, it was definitely a good thing. At this point, she just wanted to eat and sleep in a litter comfortably without having to fear the dangers lurking outside for at least one night. Soon, Mu Yang Yang was escorted by 2 armed men to a separate villa where several survivors in charge of meals prepared a table of dishes for her to eat at will. After taking a hot shower and changing clothes, while looking at the rice, chicken soup, vegetables, and fried meat as well as the different choices of drinks on the table, Mu Yang Yang again cried bitter tears and enjoyed from the depths of her heart what for her was the best meal she had ever had in her entire life. While Mu Yang Yang was being taken to rest and due to the sudden increase of survivors, Bai Zeman had sent a messenger to the beginning village to report the situation to Shangguan Bing Shuet. *****. 3 hours later, in the middle of a road about 10 kilometers from Bai Zeman's current location, a convoy of 3 buses and 2 SUVs were moving at a steady speed in a southerly direction. Inside the SUV leading the way, Shangguan Bing Shui was sitting in the back seat while looking out the window with an indifferent gaze. She had received Bai Zeman's report and after discussing it with Wu Yujun, she decided to bring some men to pick up the survivors and take them back to the beginning village. After all, they could not currently afford to separate their meager forces into 2 villages. The young driver's eyes occasionally looked in the rear-view mirror and the man couldn't help but sigh at the icy beauty. However, for fear of losing his mind, his glance did not linger for more than a second at a time before returning to the road. Swoosh! Suddenly Shangguan Bing Shui's face changed slightly and without hesitation she slammed the door before rushing out without flinching. The vehicle that was traveling at about 30 to 40 km per hour due to the bad condition of the road continued to move forward for a few more meters before it suddenly began to split in 2. Boom! Without warning, the car exploded in a cloud of fire, killing the driver in the process. The convoy traveling behind immediately came to a screeching halt, barely avoiding a car crash. Nobody get out of the vehicles! Shangguan Bing Shui appeared in front of the buses and coldly ordered while looking towards the forest on their right. Because there were only about 60 armed men in total due to the shortage of firearms and ammunition, Shangguan Bing Shui had left the other 30 with Wu Yujun and Cai Jingyi in the beginning village to avoid any kind of disturbance. This meant that she was the only person with actual combat ability within this group of survivors. Ki-ki-ki-ki. A strange sound similar to a person's laughter but also similar to the screeching sound of 2 metal plates rubbing against each other came from between the trees. Shangguan Bing Shui did not stop on ceremony and unhesitatingly activated her most reliable skill as she pointed her wand forward. Freeze! A thick white cloud burst out of her body and in the next instant surrounded the trees in front of her. The trees began to freeze bit by bit and less than 5 seconds later, everything 10 meters ahead had turned into ice statues. The place remained silent and a gentle gust of wind made Shang Guanbingshui's combat dress dance in the breeze gently. Her face suddenly changed and as she gritted her teeth she created a large wall of ice in front of her before putting strength into both legs and jumping backwards. Swoosh! 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 Following the sound of the howling wind, a dozen arrows flew from the shadows of the forest and hit the ice wall but failed to pierce it completely before getting stuck. Just as Shang Guanbingshui touched down 10 meters away, a shadow shot out from the forest. Bang! The thick ice wall that was capable of stopping even bullets from multiple guns was smashed into hundreds of pieces that flew everywhere. However, Shang Guanbingshui was more surprised by the creature in front of her. Approximately 5 feet tall, a big belly, thick arms covered with fat, sharp pointed ears, huge nose, bulging yellow eyes, teeth that protruded in point, and in one of its hands it carried a huge white bone while it was completely naked except for a brown-colored rag loincloth that covered the lower half of its body. Go Goblin! Shang Guanbingshui's beautiful eyes flashed with disbelief and for the first time, she couldn't help but stutter in shock. Kiki! The fat goblin with a big bone stick laughed and while pointing at her shouted some strange words. Shang Guanbingshui frowned and soon, to her utmost surprise, 12 small goblins barely half the size of the goblin in front of her came out of the forest. These 12 small goblins, about a meter tall, also wore loincloths made of tattered rags that barely covered the lower part of their bodies. However, the clearest distinction with the big goblin apart from the size and the big belly was their weapons. While the fat goblin wielded a large white bone, the smaller goblins had wooden crossbows in their hands and a small quiver with sharp bone arrows on their backs. All of you follow the road and look for Bai Ziman and the rest. Shang Guanbingshui ordered calmly and without waiting for a response from the convoy drivers dashed off into the forest behind her. Seeing her disappear into the shadows so quickly, the highest goblin shouted some sharp words and chased at full speed while the smaller goblins shouted and ran after quickly. The drivers didn't linger to think things over and set the vehicles in motion in a hurry turning into a gust of wind and dust that soon disappeared in the horizon towards the village where Bai Ziman and the rest were currently stationed. ******. Due to the existence of the mana, the forests and plants had mutated. Shang Guanbingshui ran for 5 minutes and all she saw was green, green, and more green. Knowing that it was not good for her to go too far into the great forests of China, she stopped in the middle of a large clearing as she had noticed that the fat goblin's aura was fixedly focused on her, which meant that due to their equivalent speeds she could not leave the monster behind. Swoosh! 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 Immediately after she stopped, the wind swooshed and Shang Guanbingshui swiftly retreated, causing the bone arrows to miss their target and instead hit the ground and the trees behind. Kikik! The fat goblin stepped out of the shadows of the forest and laughed loudly as it looked at her and licked its dry lips with its monstrous tongue. Although the goblins of the fantasy stories were not necessarily the same as the goblins born from the mana of the world, at least their lewdness was the same considering the lustful eyes the little creatures had when they looked at the beautiful woman in front of them. Shang Guanbingshui was never a woman of many words, so after judging and identifying her enemies she immediately began to attack with no other intention but to end the other side's life. Ice thorns. Under her command, the ground in front of the fat goblin suddenly froze and several sharp-tipped thorns shot out without warning. The fat goblin snorted through its nose and without any strange act struck forward with its bone stick, destroying the ice thorns with utter ease before charging forward while laughing wildly. Shang Guanbingshui frowned slightly as the enemy's physical strength was really annoying. Her ice maker skill was great for attacks, defenses, and even traps, but it wasn't as destructive as fire-type skills or other attacking elements. The fat goblin swung its bone stick and hacked horizontally. Although the bone stick was not sharp, it was incredibly hard, so if this attack hit her she could definitely break a rib or two. Shang Guanbingshui jumped high into the air, evading the attack, and waved her hand creating several ice bullets before shooting them forward. The ice bullets hit the fat goblin's body, but all of them exploded on its tough skin and turned into water that ran down its body. The beast laughed out loud as if it was sneering. The 12 small goblins raised their crossbows while laughing like wild children and shot towards Shangguan Bingshui, who had not yet touched solid ground. Being in midair, it was simply impossible to dodge, therefore, Shangguan Bingshui created a small ice platform under her feet and hurriedly used it to propel herself to the side, barely avoiding the bone arrows. Just before reaching the ground, she pointed with her wand and coldly said, "Ice arrow." Immediately over 20 ice arrows were crafted and with a wave of her hands were launched forward at astonishing speeds. Being level 25, just one step away from evolving, Shangguan Bingshui was way more powerful than the small goblins. The small beasts could not even react when the more than 20 arrows pierced them in the head, chest, heart, abdomen, and other parts of their bodies. You have acquired the soul power of Wild Goblin level 16. You have acquired the soul power of Wild Goblin level 13. 12 messages quickly flashed in her retina, and Shangguan Bingshui finally realized that these creatures really were goblins and not just identical in appearance. After all, the soul record possessed the power to read the very soul and source of every being in the universe. At the quick death of its comrades of the same race, the fat goblin laughed with its high-pitched voice and as if it cared nothing about it charged forward again with the intention of injuring her severely. Right. From the beginning the goblins were aiming to injure and capture her, not kill her. As for the reason, she was clear about the purpose. Shangguan Bingshui couldn't help but chuckle coldly and her red lips curved into a strange smile. Ice vines. From the ground, dozens of frozen but incredibly flexible vines shot out towards the fat goblin, successfully stopping its charge. The beast growled as the fat on its body seemed to vibrate, causing the ice vines to crack rapidly. Shangguan Bingshui expended 60% of her remaining mana and crafted a small, delicate ice sword. She rushed forward in a hurry knowing that her time was limited as the vines definitely could not hold out for more than a second or two at most. Just before the vines exploded into thousands of tiny ice fragments, she managed to make a light slash at the fat goblin's body before being forced to retreat as the large bone stick hit the ground where she was previously standing, shaking the earth hard. Keek 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 keek. The fat goblin touched the wound on its chest from where some green blood was barely trickling out and burst out laughing. Shangguan Bingshui noticed that the wound was too light and could not help but frown slightly. Although this ice sword had consumed practically all her mana, she could barely pierce through the skin of the enemy before her. Worst of all, to maintain the ice sword she needed to constantly consume mana, so at most she needed to finish the battle in 30 seconds before she was powerless. While Shangguan Bingshui had great control over her own mana, it was impossible to completely master it in such a short time. Even she, just like Bai Ziman, could not help but overconsume when she found herself in too tough a fight, because a small mistake in activating her skill could make a big difference in energy consumption. The fat goblin licked its bloody hand and charged forward again. Its eyes flashed with unbridled madness and burning lust. It was as if the beast knew no fear or as if it could feel no pain from the wound in its chest. What? Inside the main villa of the village recently recaptured by Bai Ziman and his troops, he abruptly stood up and his eyes flashed with a hint of surprise as he looked at the young man in front of him. Are you telling me that halfway there appeared a dozen of goblins? He asked as if to confirm that he hadn't misheard the previous report. Why yes. They. Young driver and the rest of the drivers in the caravan led by Shangguan Bingshui nodded immediately. One of them exclaimed worried and frightened, "Leader Bai, one of those goblins was really big and looked powerful. Miss Shangguan Bingshui told us to go ahead to report the situation to you, but she was left fighting alone against those strange creatures. Damn it!" Bai Ziman couldn't help but curse and quickly disappeared from his position, charging towards the northern road. He hadn't expected the goblins to suddenly attack someone in his group when he had only just learned that these creatures existed. *******. In the same clearing within the forest, Shang Guanbing Shui was engaged in a fierce battle against the fat goblin. Each of them had their respective advantages and disadvantages, so from an outsider's point of view, it might appear that they were evenly matched. However, the reality was that Shang Guanbing Shui's situation was quite complex at the moment. Swoosh! She slashed with the ice sword in her hands and a new wound appeared on the fat goblin's back that was now riddled with light cuts from which green blood was constantly spurting out. Keek keek keek! The fat goblin laughed and swung its bone stick backward, causing the air around it to blast, unable to withstand the pressure. Shang Guanbing Shui's beautiful face was as cold as the personification of the ice itself. She muttered a few words and a thick ice wall rose up between her and the fat goblin as she jumped backward in a hurry. Boom! When the white bone stick slammed into the ice wall, the force contained by the attack made by the fat goblin caused the mighty defensive wall to withstand no more than a second before breaking into thousands of tiny pieces of ice. Shang Guanbing Shui's silver hair danced disorderly with the shockwave resulting from the previous explosion. Her face was almost as white as a sheet and her ample bosom rose and fell steadily as a small bead of sweat slid silently down her small nose. Shang Guanbing Shui's total mana was just over 220, but even though the battle against the fat goblin had barely extended for about 5 minutes since it erupted, her total mana had decayed to just over 70 total points. The constant activation of her first-order ice maker skill to make vines, thorns, bullets, ice pikes, and ice walls to contain the enemy's explosive movements and attacks before her, as well as the creation of the ice sword charged with mana and magical power, had drained her mana relentlessly. Moreover, to maintain her only weapon she needed to administer mana charges constantly and practically without rest. At this rate, she could barely last a few more seconds before losing most of her battle power. Keen kik 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 kik. She looked over and saw the fat goblin laugh. Even though the creature's body was plagued with cuts and blood had stained its entire body as well as the ground beneath it, it was still laughing loudly as it looked at her and licked its broken lips. She gritted her teeth and charged forward again, engaging in a dangerous hand-to-hand battle in which the slightest of mistakes could cost her dignity as a woman if not her life. Shang Guanbing Shui launched ice bullets, striking the fat goblin's body again and again. Although her attacks clearly had no effect, she continued to perform the same action relentlessly. The fat goblin had a mocking smile and charged like an unstoppable locomotive as it defied the ice bullets and swung its bone stick fiercely in all directions. Boom! 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 Ice wall after ice wall were destroyed by the goblin's fierce blows, and Shang Guanbing Shui was forced to retreat repeatedly until finally her mana fell dangerously. She looked at the enemy goblin and dropped the ice sword. With a pale face, she observed how the weapon she had created after consuming much of her mana disappeared at the same time as she stopped losing mana to maintain it. The goblin laughed out loud and took a step forward when suddenly its fierce and lustful expression froze completely. For the first time, the monster's eyes glittered with a tinge of fear as stared in front of it and its entire body quivered. No! Wait! Bai Ziman, who had traveled 10 kilometers in the blink of an eye and had been searching for Shang Guanbing Shui through the forest, stopped his movements when he heard the delicate cry behind him. The Xian Yuan sword shone coldly with the sun's rays reflecting off the blade, and a bead of sweat slid down the goblin's face. The fat goblin could feel death, absolute death, coming from the dark eyes of the human before it. It was like when the sun was covered by the moon and the night seemed to descend unexpectedly after the appearance of the eclipse that blocked the light. What? Bai Ziman jumped back to make distance between him and the monster and looked at Shang Guanbing Shui as if he were looking at a crazy woman. Did she want him not to kill the goblin? Her face was terribly pale and her breathing was irregular, which clearly indicated excessive consumption of mana and stamina. Besides, Bai Ziman had arrived just in time to see the ice sword fall from her hands. You'll act arrogant even now? He couldn't help but rebuke with a frown. Shang Guanbing Shui shook her head and looked at him with clear eyes. It's not that. This goblin is just what I need to evolve to the next stage. Just look carefully and you'll understand. Bai Ziman frowned and nodded before jumping towards a tree behind him. His eyes fixed on the goblin, waiting to kill it in case she couldn't do something about it. Though he hoped she would become stronger as that way she would be more useful, if she died nothing he had done so far would make sense. The fat goblin suddenly roared and charged forward. Its lustful eyes had disappeared and turned bloodshot. Due to the appearance of a much more powerful enemy with such a horrifying soul power, the fat goblin had decided to kill the woman to absorb some of her soul power and evolve to have a chance of defeating the human man. Shang Guanbing Shui smiled. Her smile, though exhausted, was bright and warm like the rays of the sun that illuminated the entire world. For a moment, Bai Zemin could not help but even compare her to Lilith's smiles, that's how beautiful her current smile was. She raised her flawless right hand and whispered, "Burn." The blazing ring on her index finger glowed and a mighty burst of crimson flame shot out, enveloping the goblin completely. The creature roared in pain and the skin on its body began to vibrate. Surprisingly, after a couple of seconds, the crimson flames burst outward and disappeared into midair. The beast had managed to shake them off with its strange skill. The goblin's body had some burns, but the most striking thing was the amount of hot steam coming out of its skin. This hot steam was burning the monster's body little by little and its source was, surprisingly, all the water that had been left in its pores. Water that had formed from the ice bullets launched by Shang Guanbing Shui since the beginning of the battle. What happens when something cold collides with something extremely hot? Shang Guanbing Shui looked at Bai Zemin with her smile still imprinted on her exhausted face. Then what happens when an extremely hot object comes into contact with something extremely cold? You. Bai Zemin's eyes flashed with realization and he couldn't help but feel admiration towards the woman in front of him. Shang Guanbing Shui turned her eyes to the goblin in front of her and said indifferently as she pointed her wand at it, "Freeze." Spending her remaining 30 mana points, a blast of freezing air struck the goblin's body and encased it in a statue of ice. However, the beast did not give up and fought. Its body vibrated strangely and cracks began to spread through all the ice that was holding it back. A few seconds later, the ice broke completely and the goblin roared once more before stepping forward. However, just as it had just lifted its foot to move forward, the beast's eyes widened. Crack! 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 Tiny, minuscule cracks appeared on its right leg that in a matter of milliseconds spread throughout its entire body. Bai Zemin could clearly see how the goblin's entire body was riddled with cracks as if it were a vase about to shatter into pieces. Indeed, the comparison was not too far from reality. Bang! At the same time as a big orb of soul power entered Shang Guanbing Shui's body, several messages flashed in her retina. However, there was one in particular that fascinated her. You have successfully evolved to First Order and obtained the unique class Charming Ice. It was then that her smile widened even more and as the sun's rays hovered over her, Bai Zemin couldn't help but think that perhaps, angels really did look that beautiful. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Heavy Hobgoblin level 47. Freeze unclassified enemies, 5000/5000. Kill unclassified enemies using the Ice Maker skill, 2000/2000. Kill First Order enemies, 2/2. Charm an enemy with your natural beauty, 1/1. You have successfully evolved to First Order and acquired the unique class Charming Ice. Your innate beauty is worth contemplating and appreciating. As pure and unblemished as a flawless ice fairy. All ice-type attacks inflict 20% more damage and increase the resistance of your ice creations by another 20%. Your charm increases. You have acquired Second Order Active Skill Level 1 Charming Eye. You have leveled up to level 32. You have gained 14 status points to distribute freely. All absorbed soul power has been calculated correctly. You get additional stats, Strength plus 40, Agility plus 29, Stamina plus 25, Health plus 20, Mana plus 30, Magic plus 27. Although Shang Guanbing Shui had accumulated more soul power to level up than Bai Zemin by the time she successfully evolved, this was because he had advanced to First Order significantly faster than she had. With about a week more time accumulating experience, it was natural for her to level up a little more in comparison. However, even then, the amount of additional stats she had accumulated were far less than Bai Zimin's at that time. This was because Shangguan Bingshui had accumulated soul power from weaker existences, while Bai Zimin had fought and killed more than one First Order being before successfully evolving. After evolving to First Order, Shangguan Bingshui felt as if a new world had opened up before her and her soul was strengthened in such a way that, for a moment, she herself could not believe it. But the most important thing for the present her was that after leveling up her stamina regenerated to 100% immediately and the mana gained due to the extra stats she had accumulated during the process of evolving to First Order had caused her completely pale face to gain some color again. Congratulations on evolving to First Order. A lazy voice brought her out of her inner fantasy world and looking to the side she saw Bai Zimin waving his hand from a distance. Seeing as there are no more goblins around and since you're okay, I'll head back to the village. That Chen He guy is probably out of his mind since I assume he heard that you were attacked on the way. Leaving those words behind, Bai Zimin stomped his foot on the ground and disappeared from his position leaving a gale behind him. Seeing this, Shangguan Bingshui's glance became a bit complicated and she couldn't help but sigh as she sat down next to a tree as although her stamina had regenerated mental fatigue was present. Even though I just received a huge power boost, even though I can feel my soul power becoming infinitely purer than before I evolved, I still can't even understand how strong you are. Shangguan Bingshui muttered under her breath as she recalled that ghostly speed with which Bai Zimin disappeared as well as the look of fear in the heavy hobgoblin's eyes. Shangguan Bingshui was a competitive woman by nature and even more so against the opposite sex due to certain past events as she wanted to prove herself that women could stand on their own and surpass men. However, the stronger she became, the more she felt that the distance between her and Bai Zimin increased. In the past, regardless of whether it was the talented and handsome Chen He or any other outstanding young man, Shangguan Bingshui had been able to surpass them all, from school grades to compatibility, she was simply perfect in every aspect. However, since the apocalypse broke out without warning, Bai Zimin had unconsciously become her greatest rival. She had strived to surpass him and, in fact, at some point their strength was not that far apart and except for different strengths, their overall power was similar. But at some unknown moment, that normal-looking young man with an ordinary past with nothing to highlight simply shot into the sky, and now she could barely make out his shadow. Forget it. After a second sigh, her blue eyes turned to the shattered corpse of the heavy hobgoblin and her lips curved into a cold smile. She had taken a risk when she had chosen the unique class Charming Ice as the last requirement might be somewhat difficult. However, she knew she was beautiful and was confident in her beauty as well as her own strength. But after so many days, no human of the First Order had crossed her path, so her beauty had no use whatsoever. After all, the mutated and evolved monsters did not notice the beauties of mankind. Fortunately for her, goblins appeared, who were lustful by nature. Unaware that there was someone floating in the sky hundreds of meters above, Shangguan Bingshui stood up after resting for a moment and picked up the drop obtained from her victory. Above the white clouds, Lilith sighed before disappearing completely and without a trace. When Shangguan Bingshui first entered the village, Chen He ran up to her with a face pale in fright and hurriedly asked, "Bingshui, how are you? I just heard that a group of goblin-like monsters from the legends attacked you." Seeing her childhood friend's handsome face filled with worry and she couldn't help but smile slightly, "Don't worry. Nothing happened to me and Bai Zimin was also there in case his intervention was needed." This. Chen He seemed to ignore much of her words and looked at her dumbfounded. After a few seconds, he noted, "Bingshui, have you become more beautiful or something?" Although Shangguan Bingshui was beautiful from before, when Chen He looked at her carefully now he couldn't help but feel that she had suddenly become a little more beautiful than usual. "Ah! This is because of..." Shangguan Bingshui gave him a brief summary of what had happened as he led her towards the main villa. On the way, the armed men guarding the important areas saluted respectfully, and the survivors who had been ordered not to leave their homes temporarily looked out the windows at the scene, wondering what would become of their lives now. So, you've already evolved to First Order? Chen He was surprised. He was currently level 24, so he only now learned about evolutions and similar matters. Listening to Shangguan Bingshui, everything felt strange to him. That's right. She nodded, and a militant guarding the door to the hall inside the main villa quickly opened the closed door to allow them to pass through. Inside, Shangguan Bingshui and Chen He were greeted by the sight of Bai Zimin and Lily chatting with casual smiles. Occasionally she laughed at his jokes or he grunted in annoyance at hers. These two definitely have something. Chen He cupped a hand over the side of his mouth and whispered. Who knows? Shangguan Bingshui replied, stepping into the room. Bai Zimin, what's wrong with those goblins? Bai Zimin, who was chatting with Lilith to relieve some of the tension he felt due to the appearance of a new type of enemy, was attracted by Shangguan Bingshui's unmistakable voice. He looked at her and Chen He before pointing to the seat in front of him and saying in a deep voice, "Sit down. We need to talk."